Apology for the slight delay. I've had some technical difficulties. Here with me today is the man, Jon Wedger. Sir, I'd just like to say from the beginning, you're one of my heroes. Just a little bit of background. He's Metropolitan Police Detective, I believe, John, isn't it?
Yeah, retired.
15 years, was it? 15 years?
27.
Oh, wow, I stand corrected. So you are, double bloody service. Double my service anyway. So yes, I was just telling John now before we go live, please try to keep the keywords to a minimum. If we're talking in, not straightforward, please understand that we're doing it to get this content out because we're heavily censored. On that note today, John, I've had my Facebook and my Instagram removed. I've obviously appealed the decision. So yes, I was hoping to get this message out to the general public sooner, but literally as soon as I posted it, they nuked my account. So without further ado, how are you, John?
Yeah, I'm really good, thanks. Yeah, busy. One thing just morphs into something else, but the topic that I talk about, it never goes away. It's one of them things that once you sort of lift a stone on this, you can never pull it back again. And that's the sort of thing that the government fears. They know that when they look into the abuse stuff, especially around children, they have advisors, and they've been advised and they've been educated that this affects a good percentage of the population, and it's a topic that most people should have, but it's a topic no one wants to have. And it's behind so much. It's really it's the rot in society. It all comes back. The inception of it is the abuse on children. So I've been speaking out for over a decade on this topic now, and it sort of comes and goes. It ebbs and flows, but it never goes away. But the one thing is that whenever you talk about this, you are never proved wrong. Never. You get classed as conspiratorial, and even when the ritualistic abuse stuff, I get classed as reinstating what I had in the 1980s, which was a satanic panic, which our dissenters claim that Satanism is false and it's just a construct of fundamental Christians like myself and all that. But
what is that? I've never heard that before, that satanic panic. What is that? I've never heard that.
Yeah, satanic panic. In the 1980s, we were moving forward journalistically. So there was a lot of good content going out about the reality that is satanic ritual abuse. So one of the sort of like the best real hard hitting sort of doorstepping journalists that we had was a guy called Roger Cook, and he had a program called The Cook Report during the 80s, in which he didn't care, this bloke. He was a big rotund fella, but he would go anywhere and he'd confront any sort of criminality. He's taken the fight to the bank robbers, the Brinksmat robbers. He's done it with the IRA, drug dealers, everything. But he also did it with the Satanists. So he took the fight to them. And the expose was coming out. The one thing with ritualistic abuse, the practitioners of it do not want to be exposed. So Satanists do not want to be exposed, right, at all. They claim it's a religion. If you listen to their manifesto, it's one of benevolence. That they're in tune with nature. They're against bullying. They're against tyranny. But the devil's a liar, and it is a big lie. And his language is that of deception. It's the worship of the self. Ultimately, but of course that is a narcissistic attitude, and once you sort of allow that to be in predominance, then you're in a world of trouble. So he was speaking out and doing stuff. Then there was a couple of really high profile cases that came out in Nottingham, in the Orkney Islands, and a few of them all over the country, and it really shone the light on the ritual abusers. And on top of that, there was a really stoic politician called Geoffrey Dickens, who had his constituency was up in sort of Manchester, and he spoke out. A guy that had been in the care system himself, a strong advocate for the survivors of abuse, and he spoke out and he actually provided evidence of ritual abuse, which he handed to our then Home Secretary, Mr. Leon Breton, who later was accused on many fronts at the independent government inquiry. He was Home Secretary, this guy at the time, and he was given Jeffrey Dickens files and Kel Surprise. They all went missing, you know. So the kickback was that those sort of behind a lot of the abuse, they came up with strategy, and that strategy was that, you know, that was to class this expose on ritual abuse as just a zealoted fundamental Christian sort of overhead attack on them, really, and saying that it doesn't exist, and they'll use any excuse to blame things on the demonic, such as children wetting the bed and stuff like that. Kids have unnecessarily been taken into care. They're talking nonsense.
Oh,
and it was given the term satanic panic. Well, do you know what? There is a satanic panic, and the Satanists are panicking, and good on them. They need to panic because they're in a world of trouble. They're in a world of trouble.
Yes, they do.
You know, and,
yes, they do, man.
You know, they're behind a lot of the attacks on me. I'll get vocal on it. I go away. I'll come back and I get vocal again. And the trolling is
unbelievable. I've seen.
Yeah. It's totally off the scale. But you know, if you upset a Satanist, you're doing a good job. You know, you're doing a good job. So I don't care. I don't care for these people. I think they're deluded, they're misguided, but I pray for them. I pray that they realise that one, they're worshipping is a liar. He will ultimately abandon them, and you know, that their soul is what's at stake here, and they don't want to give it to the wrong side. You know, they're ignorant. So we you know, and a lot of people that go on to do ritual abuse, they've come from ritual abuse themselves. So they are victims themselves, but it's a very destructive thing. But on the mild side of it, it's just seen as witchcraft. It's just seen as, you know, benevolence and a way of empowerment. And survivors, sometimes they need empowerment. They look to the justice system, and they're kept wanting because the justice system is just basically it's redundant now. We've got a police force. I think if Sir Robert Peel, you know, he would turn in his grave if he knew what he had created had become. It's farcical. It's a joke, and it's an embarrassment. And I feel sorry for all those good coppers that are like myself, that joined to make a difference, that joined to protect the public, that joined to have a good tear up with the criminals, good investigators that really went the extra mile to solve crime. I feel sorry for them now because
I do, mate. I do. The soldiers in Britain, you know, because it's horrible, like you said, mate. It's when you're looking at it from a professional perspective. The last video I uploaded of Sergeant Geraint Rees, he's in the Freemasons. Well, he wouldn't tell me whether he was in the Freemasons. Like, there was loads of police there. Loads of them were saying, no, I'm not a Freemason. He wouldn't tell me. Now, I remember your live. Unfortunately, it was deleted today, the live that I done with you on Facebook. However, you was mentioning Freemasonry in, that you've seen it in work. And it's heartbreaking. And I said to the sergeant, I said, Sarge, please do your job. I don't want to upload this content and make you look like fools because you're my community. It's making us look weak. It's not just you.
Yeah, there's
sad, mate. It's very sad.
There's a guy in America. He's some sort of chief constable or head of a police department, sheriff's department. I don't really know how they work it over there. Anyway, he's a governor of this police force in the States, and he gives his speech, and he's obviously now with the strong, right-wing government that they've got now, that the crime and disorder with all conservative governments becomes, a priority. So he's turned around and he said, if you insult my officers, right, and you badmouth my officers, he said, you will wake up in the hospital and then you'll be taken to court. Okay. And he said, if you assault my officers, you will also wake up in hospital and then you will find yourself in prison. And he said, but if you come at my officers with a weapon, a blunt instrument, a knife, or a gun, I will inform your next of kin where to pick up your corpse. And I thought, at last, it was just a fantastic speech. I'm thinking, why can't we have that back? What we have. I watched one the other day,
I think
and
it's coming.
the police had a cordon outside a McDonald's for some reason, and some scrope went up and threw a right hander at a copper, and he blocked it. He did a good job. But the next thing is they just kept their place in the cordon. I'm thinking that bloke should have been eating the floor by now, and his mate next to him. The public pay to be policed, and they pay to be protected. They don't pay to watch police officers run. And when the police officers run, that's it. That means we have lost it. It's finished. It's failed. And
We
there
need
was
a
one.
more robust system.
Yeah, look, they should be a deterrent. You should not feel comfortable going up and doing that to the police. There should be fear, and a foreboding in the pit of your stomach, if you're going to go near the police like that, because it's an authoritative figure. I said to them, they're like wasps. Don't go near them because you're going to get stung. But now they're coming after people for putting on Facebook posts, and they're coming after them mob-handed. Whereas disorderly crime, antisocial crime, dishonest crime is just being left alone. So if it's happening on that level, what about serious and organised crime involving the abuse of children, which can only be solved by a hardcore proactive approach? And they don't do that.
Mate, if I'd have heard the way that you spoke of Satan, a couple of years ago, until I've been truly introduced to God, you've told me that you have, and when I met you that time and you done the speech, I would have thought you're absolutely bonkers. But like you just explained, to see a system this backward, it's done by design. It's done by, this is no mistake. You can't be this terrible at running anything, I don't think. It's
of course it was. And it starts with recruitment. So when I joined the police, a third of my colleagues had come out the military. And it was very strict back then, the police. It was almost on the training was quite military in its bearing, but the way we had to march, they did physical education and all that was quite strict and all that. So, and even when you got onto the street, it was the same. It was still an organised, disciplined service. And then they stopped doing it. They stopped recruiting from that. And now they only recruit graduates. But these are student types, right? And they've turned into this, I don't know what they are, this real left-wing soft social worker type. So they don't even wear their hats anymore. Now, I'm not one for wearing uniform. That's why I've become a detective. But if you choose to go into a uniform services, then you've got to wear the uniform. And you should wear it with pride, and you should wear it well. And it is by design. You've got to look at many things, right? So there's one part of policing. It's called geographical profiling, and everything happens for a reason, and everything goes by a pattern. There's an algorithm to everything. You've just got to recognise it, right? And you've got to take the time, and that comes with experience. That comes with hard work, and a lot of police failings are now down to incompetence and laziness, and they are. It's sheer. When I was in the police, if you got a crime reported and it went off to the CID to investigate, there's every chance every single crime that got reported got investigated. Whether it got cleared up and resulted in a charge is a different matter, but it did at the very least get investigated. Now they write off 80% of reported crimes. They write it off.
When you say write off, like what? Like what is that? It's just
they do F4 with it. It's classed as not for police action, or NFA, no further action. So it's NFA, no further action. Whereas when I was in the job, it was the flip side of it. You couldn't get a job NFA'd unless you'd exhausted all investigative pathways, avenues, whatever that the term you want to use for it. But now they do nothing, and you report a crime. They want to have full CCTV, visual and audio. They want a list of witnesses. They want you to basically investigate the effing thing for them. If you look at response time, when I was in the police, if a call come in, you was pretty much there within a minute, 2 minutes, whatever. Different for rural areas because you've got, the travelling time and everything else. But in London, we were blessed, whereas things were on our doorstep. Same as ambulances. Ambulances, they had an expected ETA, estimated time of arrival, of 4 minutes. Well, even if you wait 4 hours, they still don't turn up now. How? They surely can't be that expensive, right? Because anyone who works for the police, the ambulance, or the fire brigade, you're not going to get rich out of it, right? You'll have a nice life, but you ain't going to get rich, right? If they can afford to pay barristers on legal aid £450 an hour, then surely they can pay a paramedic or a cop of £25 an hour, whatever it is now. It might even be more. I don't know. The fire brigade are a bit different. They're purely a reactive service. The police are different. They're proactive and reactive. So they will investigate and they will detect, as well as turn up for things like the rest of the emergency services. But, like I say, you've got to look at where police stations were placed. So years ago, they put them in the epicenter of where it was happening. So they was all in the town centre. So town centres derive naturally anyway. They usually followed a water course and they were in the bottom of a valley, then hardly ever on the top of a valley. It was where everyone could get to. And it was just a natural way of people to commune and to trade. And it was usually connected to other towns, so it would be by a path or by a river or whatever. So the police station was put in the middle for a reason, because it was the epicenter. So the police were equidistant to any bit of the community they needed to get to. And if there was any trouble, they were on it straight away. And it had to be in the centre because that's where most of the trouble occurs, where you've got the highest concentration of people. And now what they've done, they've got rid of these beautiful buildings, and they were beautiful buildings, and they put these new sort of industrial monstrosities, these big industrial edifices in the outskirts of nowhere, and that is it for not just for one town, for about 3 or 4 towns. They've amalgamated not just towns, they've amalgamated different counties now. So they made things tri-counties and stuff like that, and they sell us this rubbish that it will be beneficial and all that. It wasn't. Policing evolved, and it evolved. Its inception was in this country. It did incredibly well. It became the benchmark for all policing in the world as a centre of excellence. It's based on Christian values, right? There's a lot of common sense in law as well, right? So it evolved into what it was. And what the UK had was the fairest, most uncorrupt, diligent, and successful police force in the world, bar none. But what have we got now? Even third world countries have a bigger clear up rate than we've got. We've got officers that run away when there's trouble. We've got officers that mob handily arrest a 92-year-old for standing outside during the lockdown. Yet people are getting RAPED and nothing happens. The child abuse cases go undetected because they haven't got the tradecraft to detect them. Serious and organised criminality just doesn't get touched, and the public do not get served, and they've totally lost the confidence in it. Everything's gone online now, and but what if you're illiterate? What if you're not online? What if you're of the old school? And we've still got a lot of the population that aren't computer savvy. I'm sort of a bit crap at it, but it's wrong. And what do our policing ministers do? They do nothing. What do our home secretaries do? They do nothing. In fact, our home secretaries, as we've seen with Leon Britton and Theresa May, they've been hiding files, losing files, disposing of files of the most severe criminality that any society could have, and that's the abuse of children. And then they just lie to us. And then we end up with politicians, which which are being accused of serious offending against children. And we saw that in the Dolphin Square saga. We saw that in the Elm Guest House. Whatever they've got on in America, we've had decades and decades ago. Everyone seems to think, oh, America's got the Epstein list. We've had all of that over here. We've had serial killers that have got strong connections to police forces, like people like Rose and Fred West, strong connections to local policing and the detectives there. Over 950 videotapes received believed to be of pornographic nature involving children. Not one of them was ever retained or used in evidence. Not one. Yet there was strong evidence saying that Fred and Rose West were making these videos, right? And they had a bar in their house called the Voodoo Bar, where local detectives were going there after work, drinking for free, and having it off with Rose West. Yeah, do you know what? We've had all of this. Whatever America's got, we've had. In Elm Guest House, which was a lodging house in southwest London, in a very wealthy white middle class area where young boys were being procured for sex exploitation, right? And the guest list, it was like a who's who of our political elite and the entertainment industry. I mean, there were 3 members of parliament on the list, one of the lists that was seized, and one of them was a guy called Lord Nicholas Fairbairn, who was head of the legal system and the Procurator Fiscal, which is the CPS for Scotland. He was in charge of it. He was what was called the Advocate Depute. He was in charge of the whole legal system for Scotland and all the serious and wretched, caseloads which involved child abuse had to go through him for authorization. He was named on the Elm Guest House, and he was also named by 13 out of 20 young girl victims of RAPE. They named him as being their abuser. And he was having a long-term affair with a woman called Esther Ranson, who went on to set up Childline. And we all know who. And Childline, what did it do? Why have they got to ring Childline? 0800 555 111, whatever it is. Well, let's look at that. What's that? 10 digits that a kid's got to remember. Well, what's wrong with 999? Call the old Bill. Now, when I was a detective investigating child protection cases, abuse against children, there was a referral system, the multi-agency referral system. So we would get referrals in, really basically crimes reported. People would grass up PDF files to us, and it could be the school, it could be someone from a local sports centre, it could be social services, whatever, right? And that was the main source of information we got. All the years I was doing it, all the many cases, I only dealt with one that had actually come from Childline. And I said to the referrals people who manage this thing, I said, how many come from Childline? I went, hardly any, next to nothing. So you've got this system where kids are ringing it up. Well, where are the victims of abuse? They've just filtered them out. I don't know what they've done with it. The woman who set it up is having an affair with the head of the Scottish justice system, a lord, a lead member of parliament, a close friend of Margaret Thatcher, and he's a massive nonce. And he's just one of many. We had the head of our intelligence services, Sir Peter Heyman, was accused and convicted of abusing children. We've had 3 political advisors to 3 consecutive prime ministers who turned out to be either convicted or accused of offences against children. I worked in a unit, and I dealt with serious criminality, and I dealt with top secret information. And I had to be what's known as vetted and the vetting process where they check you out. But with this sort of stuff, it was the highest level of vetting you could get. You know, it was basically to see that you're not a spy. But on top of the vetting, they wanted to know who all my friends were, my associates, what I was involved in, all my sexual partners. They want to know about my finances, that I wasn't horrendously in debt and all that. So there was no way I could be blackmailed or I had a weakness, right? And on top of that, I had to be psychometrically tested, which is a very, very clever psychological test to make sure I was not a PDF file, right? Because I'll be working, and I was also not to be a survival of childhood trauma, childhood abuse or whatever, right? Because it will affect how you investigate, and rightly so. That's common sense. And I passed all of them things, and I went on to be allowed to investigate these crimes and deal with this level of information. So when someone is given the highest term of office in the country, why aren't they vetted? How could we have got a prime minister in the name of Ted Heath that was allowed to go on to abuse many, many, many boys, you know, seriously abuse them, and also be openly accused by Chief Constable of being involved in satanic ritual abuse and Satanism, which Ted Heath was? How could we get a Home Secretary in the name of Leon Britton, you know, who was letting files go missing and later on to be accused of some very, very serious allegations against children? And was caught on occasions by his protection officer hanging around public toilets, believed to be in an attempt to procure young boys. How is that allowed? How is that allowed? It doesn't make any sense. And if you're running a government, right, and you're at the top, you know, we need to know that the people we got are reasonable and sound and morally stoic individuals, not weird, nancy, emotionally damaged, do you know what I mean? Dysfunctional perverts, which is what we've gone and had. It doesn't take much to weed these weaklings out. So when you said earlier, this is by design, not accident, 100% truth. This has been
100%,
allowed to happen. Otherwise, that, you know, the British have gone on to have the most extensive and best functioning empire ever. It was the envy. It was the envy of everything. It was the envy of the Nazis. You know, we did it in a way that was far better than Romans because we did it via a thing called franchising. But we would engage the local populace like the East India Company and the East African, and they would have their own businesses, but they would run on a franchise by the central British government, and it went on to become classed as one of the fairest and most functioning empires, and along with that become this incredible transport communication network, which went all around the world. You know, you could get on a train and go to every single village in the UK. You could virtually visit near enough every single country in the world because of the amazing communication network. And in 1963, when the empire collapsed, everything collapsed. A bloke called Beeching, who put out a review into our trains, withdrew 2/3 of our train network. Well, what idiot would do that when the population is growing and the economy is growing? Why'd you cut back on it? And then they come out with some absolute nonsense and rubbish. And it turned out that Beeching and his family were one of the biggest traders in tarmac. You know, yet why is no one scratching their head and thinking this is just absolute corruption? And it's been allowed to happen. It's been allowed to happen, and we've gone on to have perverts not just running the country, but put in positions of extreme influence, especially when it comes to things like home secretaries who are in charge of law and order. You know, and so if you was to design a system that would fail, this is a system you would design, our system.
Freemasonry, mate.
It's everything, and at the top of that is evil. It's evil.
Evil. Well, that's the thing. You know, some of my army friends, you know, when I debrief them, they're like, "Oh shit, Vince, I joined the Freemasons," and I say, "Well, you know, like the lower ranks don't understand what they're doing up the top of the echelon, you know."
No, they don't.
But they're very cruel and they're very evil. you know, there's a specific word that I won't mention on you because I know they'll just take the content straight down, but
I had
it's
a
to do with the.
I had a colleague.
Go on, sorry, bro.
In the police, it was everywhere. It was endemic, especially when you got to the detective branch, CID, and when you got into specialist investigation, it was almost a given. Especially things like flying squad or dog handlers or things like that, drug squads. Yeah, there was a lot of Masons in that. And my colleague, he joined and he said, "Oh, it's really good. It's the only way to move forward. John, everyone's in it. Everyone's in it." And I was always skint and I didn't understand it. I didn't really know what it was, to be honest, to start with. But years later, I bumped into him and he said to me, I now realise what it is. He said, "It's devil worship, John. It's devil worship." And he went on to join a unit called the Knights Templar. And he said when he went for his initiation ceremony for this group called Knights Templar, he said they started worshipping a thing called two things. One was Baphomet, and the other one was called Abaddon. And he said, "Have you ever heard of these things?" I went, "Well, yeah." I said, "Baphomet's that androgynous goat thing that that's
Fucking
very
Satan.
and of course Abaddon is a biblical demon that guards the pit of hell. So these are people that are worshipping that. They're worshipping it. And of course, they think it's allegorical. They think, it's just a word. They don't know. They don't bother looking into it. It doesn't mean anything to them. But it's all for a purpose. It's all for a reason. And they got the G, but they don't say it's God, do they? They call it the Grand Geometrician. Now, I've interviewed quite a few victims, survivors of ritualistic abuse, satanic ritualistic abuse, and I've also interviewed people that have been involved in Satanists. Now, one guy, he was intergenerational victim of ritual abuse, but he also was involved with it for a few years, and he said there's a book in the Bible called the Book of Isaiah. And I said, I'm aware of Isaiah. Now in the Bible, there's 66 books, right? And it's split 2/3 of it are the Old Testament, and the rest of it's what they call the Good News, which is the New Testament, right? And the Book of Isaiah has got the exact same ratio. It's got the sort of like the old bad news, and it's got what's classed as the New Hope, which is exactly the same amount of books as in ratio between the Old and the New Testament. But Isaiah was a prophet, and he would have dreams 7 years before the birth of Jesus about this guy that's he's being whipped, he's been tortured, and he's dying for us. And he said this guy's going to be the savior, and his job was to tell the world, but they all laughed at him. But in the book of Isaiah, there's a thing called the 5 I wills, and it's when the devil exalts himself above that of the throne of God. And he says, I will rise above the clouds. I will this, I will that. But the final I will is, I will be like the Most High. And it will never be like the Most High, because the Most High is God. And that's that. And God created the devil. So that God will never destroy the devil. St. Michael, and the archangels will be deputized to do that. God won't do that. God doesn't have to do that, right? But he will replicate the devil, everything, in order to be like the Most High, right? But he's a liar, he's a thief, he's a destroyer, he's a murderer, And the Satanists, they use the book of Isaiah in their rituals, and there is a satanic worship called the 5 I wills. And in Satanism, for as much as I can sort of quote on this, having not been one, but spoken to enough of them, is that they're very sensitive about dates and times, right? They're obsessed with it. So numerology is a big thing with them. So certain dates, certain times, they adhere to them, strict adherence. And the I wills are committed at 13-year intervals. So an initiate into Satanism, a child born into it, will have his first I will at the age of 13. And it's called whatever the I will is, but it's classed as the rebirthing. And I said to Guy, well, rebirthing, well, what do you mean? He went, well, you have to get rid of the creation that is God. And the creation then you step into is that one of the devil. I said, well, how'd you do that? And he went silent. I went, oh, please don't tell me. Is this human sacrifice? He went, yeah. And he said, we took part in, he took part in the murder of a young baby. And that was destroying the beautiful creation of God. So babies are of extreme value to these people because it's all about the blood and it's the destruction of what is most precious to God. And he said, but you're under a lot of mind control. Your mind is split. There's certain words will trigger you. But after that, you can go on with your normal life. You can. Yeah, 1 sec. Can you bear with me 1 second? I've just got.
Yes, of course, mate, of course. So that was mental truths. Yeah. This may be new to a lot of the viewers. I've read all about Satanism and Freemasonry whilst I was in the army. I actually seen John, a video of John.
I'm back with you. So this guy says to me, so anyone who's involved in Satanists can go on to live a normal life. They can go to school, they can go to work, they can go to church, right? So you all get Satanists that attend church. He said, and I would attend church with my mum and dad and all that. I said, right. He said, but then some people wake up, they have an awakening, and there's a conflict in their inner self that they know that what's going on is wrong, and they fear the next 13 years, right? They know that at some point this next I will is coming up, right? So when the second one approaches, this is when a lot of people wake up and they rebel. But like Freemasonry, they're under a curse. They're under a curse that if you leave, that's it, you're finished. So he said, so if anyone doesn't turn up for their I will, doesn't participate, the curse is on. The next year, they're either done in or they destroy themselves through suicide or drug addiction, overdose, whatever it is. And he said to me, think where you've seen that. Where have you heard that? And I went, I don't know. He went, look at the numbers. 13. How old is someone at the next I will? And I went, well, 26. He went, yeah, the next year. How old will they be? I went, 27. He went, there you go. He said, look at how many people die at the age of 27. The 27 Club, Amy Winehouse, Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin.
Oh, is that 27?
All these, boom, 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 yeah. Wow. The 27. And he said, so I said to him, so those that are dying at age, they're involved in Satanism? He went, yes, yes, yes.
That's insane.
And of course, you see them going downhill, these people doing a lot of drugs and all that, because they can't live with it. They know it's wrong. They know it's wrong. But the other thing is that when people are involved in Satanism, the devil will reward them instantly. God does things in his time, and he just does them for free. The devil will do it straight away, but you'll never pay back that debt. Even if you borrow 1 penny off the devil, you'll never pay back that debt. You'll never pay back that interest, and he will collect. So one woman said to me, why would I give up what's been given to me? She was involved in Satanism, and she admitted to me being involved in the murder of a child. She told me she cut the fingers off a little boy with shears. And this woman, she worked for the government. She's no longer with us, but she said, John, you've got to understand that because of this, I'm psychic. I know what my partner's up to all the time. She said, I can actually get any man I want. Any man I want, I'll get. And she said, and I can and I do. She said, I've had the best life. I've traveled all around the world, 5-star. I've had everything I could possibly want. And anyone who messes with me, they're finished. So they're total empowerment. And the moment they lose that demonic protection, they're on their own. And they feel vulnerable and they feel scared like the rest of us. So there's all these reasons why people, you know, do it. And if you've come from abuse, if you have been abused, and if we take like Satanism to start with, you know, ecclesiastical buildings are used, so that there are old churches, and they found that a lot of these old Norman churches in the UK, they were built on the site of old pagan worship venues, and even the altars in the church, they found that some of them were actually the old, um, you know, the sacrificial slab, as it were, from pagan worship. They've actually just taken it and placed it into a Norman church in the exact same spot. They'll be on ley lines. There'll be a lot of, you know, all of that old paganistic location and stuff that goes on with it, right? But churches are used. There'll be priests that are involved in it. So people think it's of God. They think it's a church doing it, and it will stop them ever going for real salvation and deliverance, which is what is needed, because it's a demonic battle, you know. And when someone is abused and they're young and they're innocent, they're scared, and they call out for help, and some call out to Jesus, and he don't help them. He ain't there. And they say to me, I don't hear about your God, your Jesus, John. I don't hear about it, because where was he when I was abused? Yet my abuser lives in a big house and is a millionaire. And Jesus has rewarded him. But look at me, I'm on drugs, I'm mentally ill, I've had kids taken into care, you know. Where is it? And I don't agree with it, but I see their point. And they have an anger towards God, towards Jesus. And you have to say to them, this wasn't of God. There was no way Jesus would allow this. And he doesn't allow this. But this is what happens. And this is what stops people going for spiritual deliverance and for proper help. And they will never be set free.
Can I just add to that, though, to the audience? A friend of mine made a point of this, and he said, you can't have love without free will. So I appreciate a lot of shit things happen in the world. Just before we went live, I was watching, you know, Tim Ballard, the guy from Sound of Freedom.
Yeah.
I was just watching one of his most recent videos. Oh my God. And it's heartbreaking, because the content is really coming out now. It's on like Facebook, and, you know, it's on the social media platforms that were really censored years ago. And you're just seeing bodies, and it's children. These are little bodies, you know, and there's...
Well, kids are always, they're the commodity. It's always been the way. We've had it in the children's homes, the abuse that went on, and it was the young boys and the young girls that got it, you know, and it's been going on a long time. Do you know that there was a guy in the United Kingdom, and he got hold of 40,000 vulnerable children, 40,000, and he decided to auction them into what's called the New World. So the New World was South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, and Canada, right? And he decided he's going to auction them. And he knew that these children were going into extreme domestic servitude and sexual slavery. And that man's name was Dr. Bernardo. He trafficked and sold more children into wretchedness than anyone really in legal history. Yet he was seen as this philanthropist, this benevolent guy, and all that. It came out in the government inquiry. I'm not saying it because it's a load of nonsense. It came out in the government inquiry. You know, some of these children were sent out to the outback of Australia at the ages of 8. They were sent out. They were called the Nabindum boys, and they got sent out to the monasterial buildings where they were just brutally R-worded, you know, RAPED. They were brutally done, and then they were made to work in blistering or in hot seat, temperatures, you know, in the outback of Australia, of all them nasties that were there. And a lot of them went on to commit suicide, or at the very least become aggressive alcoholics. You know, it's gone on. It's gone on all the time. We've had it. That's why we've got so many mentally ill people in prison. That's why we've got so many people, drunk alcoholics, that so many people that can't work because they're on antidepressants. They're ill. And a lot of people that have been through that childhood trauma, they can't work for anyone, so they end up self-employed. And if they can't stick that, they end up not working because they see any sort of governance over them as an abuse of authority. Yeah, and it gets even worse because some of these young men, when it was done to them, infant boys, and these grown men did these things to them, the physiology of a child is not built to have that sort of stuff done to it. It's not. Just isn't. It's not. Even an adult man isn't built for that. An anus is not a vagina. An anus is a sphincter muscle. It's a loop of little chain muscles that all connect. And when they're ruptured through forced entry, they don't, like a vagina stretches and goes back. Women can have 20, 30 kids and it will still go back to an almost normal degree. All right? And it will, of course, time and everything else, things wear out, and that's life. But on the whole, it will go back and do its job. No matter what people say in the spirit of diversity, an anus is not a vagina. And once you rupture it, the wrong way with an object bigger than it should be taking, it will break. And it might look like it's all right, but it ain't doing its job. And that's to be an airtight sphincter muscle. So these poor souls end up leaking. And they end up leaking defecate, which is a waste material which stinks. And if you're in close proximity to people, you too will stink. And because it's damaged, you can't control when it is going to leak and when it isn't, because our bodies are going to digest. Unless you starve to death, that's what's going to happen. So the shame, the embarrassment, and also, they'll be in bed with their partners and they will leak in the bed. So a lot of them end up sleeping on their own and doing their own washing. And it's things like that's that no one talks about because of the shame attached to it and everything else. So this is what these pigs, these beasts do. But I'm telling you now, there is a God and there is a man called Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ came to heal and to deliver, but his main goal was to protect them children. He knew what happens when you defile a soul. And he gave a warning. In the books of Mark, Matthew, and Luke, he gave a strong warning. Anyone who causes a young one to fall away from me. Now, earlier on in our chat, I turned around to you and I said, these people don't want to go to Jesus, right? They don't want to go to Jesus because he let them down. What does that mean? That means they've fallen away from Jesus, right? Under free will, they fell away from Jesus. Right. And what does Jesus say? Anyone who causes the young ones to fall away from me, it is better that you put a millstone around your neck. Now, I don't know if any of your viewers, watchers know what a millstone is, but in order to grind corn, wheat, barley, you had these limestone discs that weighed 2 tons. They could be 6 foot 2 meters in diameter, and these things, there was 2, one on top of the other, and they would be ground in opposing directions with grooves cut in them, and they would crush the heads of corn into wheat, which we call flour, right? And one of them, it'd take 10 men to lift one of them at the very least, right? And Jesus said, it's better for you as a child abuser to put one of them around your neck and jump into the depths of the sea than I get hold of you. So what's he telling them? Kill yourself.
Yeah.
That's what Jesus says, right? So I say that to people. Come on, no, you've got this wrong. Whatever happened to you, they did.
He mentions that in The Sound of Freedom, that line, doesn't he?
I've not watched it, but
you love it, John. You love it, mate.
I did speak to Tim Ballard before that came out many years ago. He's one of the few people in the early days. There weren't many of us really speaking out, and he was. One of the few that sort of got in touch, and now of course he's very well known. But these people have done it. You know, I pray for them, and I say openly, and I think I'll finish our interview at the terminus. I'll also pray openly for these PDF files, and I'll say to them, you need to stop, and you need to stop now, and you need to go to Jesus. You need to purge yourself. Then you need to go to the police, and you need to tell the police everything you've done and everyone you're involved with, everyone. Then and only then will you have redemption for what you've done, you know, and that's that. But it's something that will bring down the government, because it's the last taboo, and it's still, and rightly so, socially unacceptable to do it. It's destructive. It ruins the soul. It shatters the soul. It causes all these problems. 80% of our prison population amongst males have come from abused background. 80%, right?
That's crazy.
And 80% of those who leave prison, they reoffend. Recidivism. It's a broken system that does not
System's
work.
shit by design. I agree, mate. It's terrible.
We could put this right. We could put this right.
Mate,
But
we're going to put this right, mate. It's coming.
But what it needs, if you've got a problem, say there's a problem in an area, right? You get the police and you say, right, you go and sort it out. And you go to the criminals and you give them a chance to stop. You tell them, right, we're coming. Don't need to do anything by surprise. Just tell them. We know who they are. Tell them. And if they don't, you hit them. And you hit them so hard, once they go down, you keep hitting them so they never, ever get up. And then you come for their families. You come for everything they've got. And it's like you get these podcasters and they interview criminals and they're belly aching about the proceeds of crime. I can't stand listening to it. So what? You don't want to pay your tax. You want to rob people. You want to thieve. You want to do that. You want to, whatever it might be, and make money out of crime. You deserve to lose everything you've got. And your family deserve to be homeless. Right? And it's as simple as that. And you come down on them. And those who offend against kids, that's it. They go away and they stay away. They cannot be let out. They cannot be trusted. But when they're in there, give them the therapy, give it to them, and then work them. Put them to productive labour and work them. You know, and they can pay out the rest of their lives in penance, working to put right what they put wrong, and put an end to it.
Mate.
And we need to install proper values again. And it will take a generation, but it will stop. But you can't ignore it and walk away from it. You can't go doing that. There's one thing you cannot do. And it's, you know, so what if the police are unpopular for doing their job? Good. They should be called pigs. They should be feared. They should be hated. They should be. Look, years ago, in the police, it was a drink drive culture, right? We all did it. But if we were stopped, we briefed it to our colleagues and they let us go. Now, there'll be a lot of people disgusted at that, but that's how it was, all right? That's how it was. But if you was off duty and you were driving home drunk and you saw police, you'd be worried. And if it was 2 a.m. and you was the only car on the road, there's every chance you're getting a tug. It's happening, right? So you better put your foot down, ditch the car and leg it, because you're probably going to get a pull and you're probably going to get nicked, right? Because that's what the fear of a police car on the road now. You can drive along now with a can of beer in your hand, drinking, next to a cop car, and they won't even look at you. You know, the driver will be firmly fixed ahead, and the operator will be sitting there on social media. There'll be some fat ponytail girl on social media, while some ex-student bearded guy is sitting there just driving and focused head, not looking there. They're a joke. It's just, it makes, honestly, it makes me want to cry.
Me too, mate. Me too.
It's so wrong. It is so wrong.
But I keep the faith, John, because you know you said you're a man of God, and I'm spiritual, but I know you're a Christian. I'm not so sure about the whole, because I think it kind of separates us. You know, I think, like, why can't all of the prophets be real? Or, you know, because you've mentioned loads of books on this podcast, that I'm unaware of. You know, there's
Well,
so much knowledge.
It's an argument of theology, but Jesus Christ is the living God. He died and he conquered death. There's a thing called the resurrection. Buddha never resurrected. Muhammad Ali, they never resurrected. Their corpses are rotten and dead in the ground. You know, they're only noticeable by the stench of their rotting corpses. You worship them, you worship necromancy. You worship Jesus Christ, you worship what's called the living God. All the other gods, you have to go to them and revere them. Jesus comes to you, he knocks on the door, he just wants you to open it, right? The relationship you have with Jesus is not one you have with a church. I was a Catholic, right? I'm not a Catholic now. I'm a non-denominational Christian. I worship the man that is Jesus Christ. And the relationship I have with him is the same relationship that a father has with a son. And it's love. It is pure. He loves us. Now, the way I explained it to someone is that all ancient religions and societies all go on about the flood that is depicted everywhere, and all these ancient books of theology and everything else are floods. And the flood did occur because of the abomination that was happening, and God was so vexed at it. The flood came. There was 2 floods, right? And he said there'll never be another one. That's it. We've done it now. But the creatures, the giants that he wanted rid of were the abomination. They weren't of God, right? They were the product of the fallen with the incarnate beings on the earth. And when they died, they couldn't return to heaven because they weren't of heaven, right? So they become the demons, the demonic realms, the disembodied spirits, right? And they have power. And then you had the fall from heaven, and a third of them, the angelic realms, millions and millions of these ancient beings that just want flesh and blood, right? That's all they want, and that's how you get the possession and the oppression and things like that. That's how that occurs, right? And you know, Jesus came to save us from that, and he came to take the punishment so that we don't have to, so that we have earned ourselves a place in heaven, right? And all the other religions, they've all come and they've all gone, but he was different in as much as he combated death and rose again. Now, like yourself, I would have had a very trivial view to all of it. I would have seen the Hindu gods as the same as this god and the same as that god, and you know, I would have seen it the same way. But I realised it's not a game. And then something happened in my life, and I ended up living a miracle. Something so profound, with nothing more than divine intervention as the explanation occurred. And it was only then that I realised it. And on top of that, I started encountering the demonic. I started encountering evil, and it frightened me that much. I knew that both was real, both evil. But the one thing that the other side was scared of, it was scared of the name Jesus. That's what feared it. Yeah, one second. Sorry.
A lot to think about with their troops. I don't know how long John's been religious. We'll ask him when he gets back now. I don't really personally know what to make of, you know, there's a lot to it. And
sorry about
go
that.
on, I was just telling the guys about religion.
I have to jump. Yeah, it's not about religion. I turn my back on the Catholic Church. But there's some good people in the Catholic Church, and there's some great people there. There's some wonderful priests and everything else, and you know, there's also been a lot of abuse that's come out of it. But I've just completed one of my ventures, and that was a documentary, and I've made a documentary called Redemption, and it's 3 people that were heavily entrenched in serious and organised criminality, all the way up to murder. And they're people that society deemed dangerous. They're people that really should have died in prison, but they were redeemed, and the system couldn't control them. So the 3 were a man called Chris Lambriano. Chris Lambriano was brother to a guy called Tony Lambriano, and Chris was classed as one of the most dangerous men in the United Kingdom in the late 1960s, and strong connections to the Cray twins. So if you've not heard of Chris, you would have heard of the Cray twins, you know. And Chris went away for the murder of a man called Jack the Hat McVitie. And whilst in the double category A prison system, he just caused chaos and mayhem. But something happened to him, and he changed. He saw evil, and then experienced Jesus, and he turned his life around. And the guy is nearly 90, and he spends every minute of the day dedicating to putting right what he did wrong. He's on a path of total redemption. He's a qualified minister now. He's just an incredible man, a lovely guy, and I do a lot of work with Chris. He helps a lot of people that are caught up in serious addiction, and he tries to prevent their suicide. Another guy is a guy called Esmond Cattell. Might not mean much to anyone outside of London, but this guy was a force to be reckoned with in the East End of London. He was a very, very dangerous man. You cross him, you're going to get shot, stabbed, or everything, and beaten at the same time. A heavy enforcer, a man involved in the security industry, a dangerous, dangerous man. You know, a guy that he had no real time for God or anything like that. You know, and he ends up being beaten basically to death, and by the sheer fact that he's built like a rhino, he survived, and he was left with horrific injuries, which were only going to get worse. And he ends up attending a church service under duress, but it was only whilst there that he ends up being cured of the most horrific ailments due to the beating he took. And he regained his sight, his hearing, pain went. He was a man in a lot of trouble. He now runs a church in the East End of London, and he just saves lives, this guy. And the third one is a man called Stephen French. People may know him. He's a notorious gangster from Liverpool, and his nickname was the Devil. He a world champion karate and kickboxer. I think he's four world title for. I think he's European, world, Commonwealth, and all this heavyweight champion. You know, but he used the anger and his fighting ability to rob drug dealers. A dangerous, dangerous man. You know, Danny Dyer did a documentary with him a few years back, and Stephen come and approached me and said, "Look, I've gone to Jesus. I want to work with you." And he's got a story of redemption, which is unbelievable. You know, you couldn't even make it up. The IRA tried to kill him and couldn't, and it's just unbelievable. But he reckons he's saved at least 1,000 young men from suicide. You know, nothing could have done this. You couldn't change these people. They were too dangerous. They had too much hatred for society, for authority. But the hand of God came, and there is a revival going on, and it is amongst the criminal classes, because a lot of them have experienced evil and seen it. And when Jesus came for the sinner, but the people Jesus had with him, he had the worst of society with him. You know, St. Paul was one of the most dangerous men. He was a murderer of Christians. He was an elite officer, you know, a centurion in the Roman army, and he was ethnically Jewish as well, so he had 2 passports. But he hated Christians, and his job was to track them down, torture, and kill them. And that was his job. He went on to become, you know, the biggest ally of Jesus. You know, there's written more in the Bible than anyone else. Most of the New Testament's down this guy. Travelled all of the New World, spreading the word of Jesus, and he, you know, rode to Damascus. That's where it comes from. And a similar thing, it happened to me. I called out in my most weakest moment, when I was under the most pressure and torment that I've ever had in my life, and God answered it, and He did. And you know, it's another story for another day. But just Google Jon Wedger's testimony, and you'll see what happened to me. And
I've seen, yes, amazing, mate.
Yeah, and that was only God. But I said to him, you know, He gave me life, and I said, you can have me. I will do your job, and my job is to go out there and spread the word, that what people are doing to children, really, you know. And I've done it, and I've turned down wealth, I've turned down media contracts, everything, because I will not be controlled by these people, and they wanted me to stick to a certain narrative. I wouldn't do it. So I ended up just really working for minimum wage and doing all sorts of odd jobs just to live. But with that, I had the freedom to carry on unabated, doing what God wants me to do. And I've done it, and I continue to do it. And I want people to realise, that this isn't the end. There's a lot of people that they do get depression because of what's happened in their life, and now's a terrible time because hope seems to be slipping away, and evil seems to be doing what it wants. And this is what happened in the end times. It was said that what's good will be bad and what's bad will be good, and that's exactly what's happened. And the target is our children. If they can get the children, then they've got the man. So and if they can defile them and they can destroy them, then they've got them. And when you, it's an interesting thing, right? So if you take a child and you decide your free will, instead of giving them a nice day, you give them a horrible day. So you decide to abuse and hurt them children, right? And that child may go on to live what society deems as a normal life. They might look good, they might be strong and healthy, right? They might intellectually do quite well. So when we look at ourselves in a holistic way, we're made up of three parts. We're made up of the physical self, we're made up of the intellectual self, and we're made up of the emotional self. So when you harm a child, physically, they can continue to flourish. And actually, they can achieve a lot. They can achieve an incredible amount and overachieve. So there's a need to do it. There's a need to, I've been hurt, you'll never hurt me as much as I've been hurt attitude. And there was an interesting program the BBC did, I think 50 years on or 40 years on, I think, 40 years on from the Falklands War. And they did a program about the first guys on the ground, and it was the parachute regiment. The 2 para were the first ones to really get stuck in, and they follow the testimony of this one section of 2 para, and a lot of them ended up with serious mental health problems because it was horrific fighting. It was hand-to-hand fighting, but there's a couple of them. It don't seem to bother them. And they both went on to join the SAS, both these guys. And they say that in them. And one of them, he said, well, weren't you frightened? He went, oh, no, I was dead anyway. He said, what you understand is I come from sexual abuse. He said, I've been in kids' homes. And when I was abused as a little kid, I died. So basically, I'm just like a dead man walking. So there's nothing they could do to me. I'm dead already. And the other guy says exactly the same. He went, oh, no, I was abused. Right, and they both went on to join the SAS, which we don't need to be told is the toughest selection course of any military unit in the world, and
Yeah.
it was and still is, And you're thinking, how do these guys pass that? Well, they pass that because there's a need to pass. There's a hate in them. There's a pain in them, and no one's going to hurt them. So you even there's quite a few world champion sportsmen, boxers that they've come from abuse. Frank Bruno was in a kids' home, and had a tough life. You get the same pattern all the time. So you see that. So physically, they can do incredibly well. Intellectually, well, they can also do incredibly well because there's a need for them to show the world who they are. They're not this little nothing that gets pushed to the one side and abandoned. The world, and someone who's come from a background where there was love and that, you don't have that anger and that want and that grit and that determination. You don't. You've got a reasonability about you, and you've got a more of a calm demeanor. But the one thing that them two categories can't overachieve in, right? And that's the emotional self. When you abuse a child, the emotional clock stops. Boom, it stops. And the younger the child is, the more emotionally damaged they're going to be if they don't get therapy. So this is when you get the inability to reason. And this is when you get military units using, in the third world, they use child soldiers. because children are narcissistic, they lack compassion, you know, and this is what we're seeing now a lot with these social services. They're getting the younger and younger people into social services that are students, have no family life. So they won't see a child as someone who needs to be in a caring, wanting, balanced mother, father. They'll see a child as a commodity, like an animal, like a dog, like a cat, you know. So it's that desensitization, and children cannot reason, and they will have what's called petulance. So if you take something off a child, they will say, I hate you, I want you to die, they'll kick you. Well, how many people have we seen in our adult lives that do that? When we cross them, oh, I'm going to kill you. Look at road rage, for example. People that commit road rage, there's that very infamous one, you know, that Ronnie Pickering one. Have you seen that? Oh, Ronnie Pickering. Well, I don't know Ronnie Pickering. I don't want to badmouth Ronnie Pickering, but there's every chance Ronnie Pickering comes from an emotionally damaged background, because Ronnie Pickering has no ability to reason. Ronnie Pickering is showing emotional immaturity and total petulance in how he dealt with a very, very minor, flippant situation.
Yeah.
He dealt with it like his world was coming to an end.
Yeah.
But this is what happens, and it's the same as a child. I hate you, and this is how you know. This is how you know that when someone has come from these backgrounds. Now, someone I can see displays a lot of what I've been on about. Yet people think, oh no, he's top of his game. Is this man, Andrew Tate? Andrew Tate.
Familiar.
Yeah, have you seen this guy, Andrew Tate?
I'm familiar with him, yeah.
Yeah, right. Now, I don't know him, you know, and all that, and I'm not going to, you know, attack his, you know, and all that. But what I'm saying is an observation. So if you ever happen to listen to this, Andrew Tate, it's an observation from someone in that profession. That's all it is. Andrew Tate has achieved 110% when it comes to physical attributes, right? Gone on to become a world champion and all that. And intellectually, again, he's overachieved. He's a highly successful businessman, and all that. But emotionally, he's a little lad. His value system is not that of befitting to a man of his age. His value system is of a 12-year-old adolescent, because it's all about fast cars, threesomes, Learjets, eating pizza, you know, drinking champagne. It's a wet dream of a 12-year-old boy. It's not a mature attitude. And how he addresses and confronts people isn't mature either. You know, you know. So I would say that he probably had a very unhappy childhood from about the ages of 8 to about 13, 14. He was probably a very, very unhappy young man. That's my deduction based on my experience, what I know, and everything else. You see, because there doesn't seem to be that emotional balance, that reasoning with him at all.
We suffer with a lot of ancestral trauma as well. A lot of my civilian friends will tell me stories of their parents, you know, and it's like I just said, a lot of ancestral trauma. So I don't even know whether they recognize it, you know.
Well, look, you've got to look at the British people, right? We came out of the Napoleonic conflicts, right, during the Victorian era, when the Brits were going out to places like Crimea and fighting the Napoleonic armies abroad and everything else, and these men were conscribed, and they were brought into the professional military, and when they were no longer needed after these, like Crimea, that's why the Guards Regiment wear the crimson, because it was the amount of blood that was shed in Crimea. They were so saturated with it, it was like a trophy afterwards, that they will forever hold them colours of Crimea, and that's why they have that colour, because it's a colour of blood, right? And it was so traumatic that when them lads come back from the Crimean, the Napoleonic campaigns, they did what most people do with trauma. They went to alcohol, and the British Army did what it does now. It just abandoned them and said, "We don't need you no more. F off." So they were on the street and they were drunk. Now, Britain had its empire and wanted the world to know how brilliant it was. And Ireland is very, I want to go on about Southern Ireland as well. So as they become a national embarrassment, they said, we can't have this. We can't have these guys lounging around the street drunk. So they did something that England's got, that the rest of Europe's not got. And it's got a thing called the licensing laws. It turned around and said, right, we're not having this, right? And then it made laws against homelessness. So it was illegal to be homeless, right? Because that's how they dealt with it. So if you're going to lounge around in the street, you're going to make it illegal. So you'll get nicked. And the First World War, that's when the licensing laws come in after the First World War. Because those guys finished with the Napoleonic conflicts, heavily traumatized, entrenched with PTSD, no therapy, no payment. And then their children and their youngsters went off to then get conscribed into the British Army once again, not a professional army as such then, but then they got conscribed into the First World War, where, whole villages lost all their men. And it caused nothing but extreme trauma. And that's when alcoholism went through the roof, right? So they said, right, we've got an empire to maintain. These men need to work. They can't be drunk in the morning. So they brought in the licensing laws to say, we can have your drink lunchtime, you can have it at night, but you're not having it during the day. So when they're going about, England with its stuffy licensing laws, well, it was needed because our men were traumatized. And they were just getting over that they were drafted off again for the next campaign. So if you didn't get got by one, you got by another. There were guys that served in both wars, right? And then they come back, and what they did, they realised, right, that the United Kingdom was on the verge of what they call a coup d'etat, a civil war, because men were walking onto parade grounds, and they were turning around and they were saying, "You are not having my child like you had me." And they were actually dragging their children off of the parade ground. So that's why they got rid of conscription. They did not get rid of conscription for any other reason than they genuinely believed that the country would kick off. Now, these were guys that were angry, they were violent, and they had access to weaponry. So what they did, in order to stop a civil war, they built the council house. So that's why we got council housing in the 1950s. And they gave them a garden which was the size of an allotment. And then another thing they gave them the Working Men's Club, the CIU affiliated ex-servicemen's club. That's how they were brought in. And that's because it was intergenerational trauma. And the best thing to do was give these people a house. It don't matter if they work or they don't work. The benefit system was coming in and get them pissed. Give them cheap alcohol and get them drunk. And Queen Victoria says, give a man beer, you'll never have a revolution. And then we started seeing the football hooliganism coming out in the 60s and the 70s. And that was because there was a lot of anger. The music was angry. And again, these are all indicators of intergenerational, it is. And I remember as a kid going around someone's house and everyone's grandparents had fought in the Second World War. Everyone's did, And I can remember going around there, and there'd be the old granddad sat in the corner drinking. I said, "I'll just ignore him. Just ignore him. He's been in the war. He's mad."
Yeah, fuck.
And they were just drunk. So and that's what they did. They just got them drunk until they died away, because of that's exactly what happened, and that's how they did it. And the government formulate these laws around it, and then we saw abuse in the care home that went along with it. So a lot of kids went into the care system in the 50s and 60s because of the war, right? And there was a lot of women that couldn't cope and they become angry and they started to hate men. They called them war widows. And they gave them jobs in these residential care homes. And they found that the abuse by women against young boys was horrific during the 50s and 60s. And that's because of the war widows taking it out. Later on in the 70s and the 80s, you've got men abusing young boys a lot more. And that was because of liberalisation. And that was because of the Equality Act. and they didn't want left-wing governments, didn't want left-wing constituents, didn't want any victimisation of homosexual applicants for residential care home places, so that they were told that when a homosexual applies for a job on a residential kids home, that there's no need to check their application, which might be okay. But if you are a homosexual and you are a PDF file, you know that whatever you've been done for or you've been sacked for, it ain't going to get checked. So there's a good job. You could be like, a kid in a sweet shop, right? And then once one gets in, he tells his mate. And then you end up in a situation like a children's home in South London called Shirley Oaks, where there was 19 known and convicted PDF files working at one time in that home. And of course, the abuse against the children was off the record. And what happened to the kids that left that home? Alcoholism, drug addiction, domestic violence. Where does domestic violence come from? It's cruel, it's controlling, right? And it's got a lack of respect for women, a hatred for women. Well, that only comes because of what happened in the home. That's where that comes from. There'll be an issue with a mum failing to protect the child against an angry father or whatever, and then there's that person that suffered that has got a greater propensity to commit domestic violence, and that's intergenerational. So they know that once you harm a kid, it will take 3 generations before healing can properly take place. So the child that gets hurt, you're talking about the child becoming a dad, then a grandfather, and then healing might take place. So it's all intergenerational. They know this. This is nothing new. And it even says it in the Bible, if you harm a child, 3 generations will pass. So it's all in there. And they know it. They don't need me to tell them that. But if you put child protection in the forefront, right, you're going to start healing society. But we don't need wars. We have wars. What's going to happen? The children are going to have to pick up the pieces. And they're going to get hurt, badly hurt. The adults will get killed or whatever it might be. Someone's got to win, someone's got to lose, but you'll be forever picking up the pieces afterwards. And it'll take a long time for that to come through. Is it worth it? Of course it's not worth it.
Of course not.
No, it's not worth it at all. But
we should never promote war, fucking
no.
No.
Well, there's that old saying, it should be jaw, not war. They all get around the table and talk their way out of it anyway. But
well, I think our generation, I think we are going to break the mold. I believe big change is coming, my friend.
Yeah, and I think it's down to us to do that. I think you're right. I totally think you're right, and we have to go on good, strong, moral Christian values. And Christian values are you'll be against harm, loss, and nuisance, and that's what we should be doing, and protecting the family, and keeping the family tight, protecting the vulnerable, the children, and the elderly, and we should do against invasive evil, whatever it might be. And you're right, it's going to come down to us, but the government's not doing it. And the police definitely aren't doing it. They're not. It's gone. See, it's all about a thing called tradecraft. Once you break the continuity, it's lost. It never bridges a gap. And in all skills, you go to a trade college, and there'll be an old bricklayer, for example, and he'd been 30 years on the trail. He's now got himself a little job in a college, and he's passing down these skills which were passed on to him, which will go back to the heyday of Victorian excellence, So it will be passed on. But if you was to break that continuity and say no more bricklaying and have a 5-year lay down and then try and pick it up, well, you can't, because those old little trade crafts, those old little tricks of the trade are gone, right? But that hasn't happened with construction, but it's definitely happened with policing. The old trade craft of the people that taught me and everything else is gone. It's gone, totally gone. And the whole recruitment, they knew years ago. It's quite funny because I do a lot with people coming out of prison and offenders and all that now. And when you talk to the older boys that have been in a long time, they say that prison's a mess now. And I said, well, when was it good? And they went, it was good when the screws had all come out the army. And they said they were all right. You knew where you stood. They were brutal. If you messed around, you got beaten. But they knew where they stood with them. They knew where they stood with them. And they liked it. But they said, no, it's a joke. It's a joke. It's a mess. There's no structure. There's no discipline. And they're removing men from society. And there's a thing in the Bible. It says, in order to take over the house, you must first remove the strong man. And you must first remove the strong man. And if you do that, you can take the house over. And this is what they're doing to our society. They're removing the strong men. They're removing the men.
I agree, man.
Demasculating us, and it's becoming wrong to become a man. It's outrageous. We need to celebrate masculinity.
Sure, man.
You know, we need to have a masculine society back. And if that offends people, do you know, I don't care if I upset an adult. I really don't care. Especially men. You've got shoulders. You know, burden it, right? I don't care. I've been put on this earth to help the kids, and I'm not been put on this earth to placate adults. I've not. Really,
mate.
If you don't like what I say, turn down the volume. You know, it's as simple as that. But you know, I'm with you, and I'm with you, and all those like-minded people that have just had enough of watching our decency go, and just watching those that we should be protecting just being left out in the lurch. And it's wrong. It's so wrong. Do you know, there was a glimmer of hope the other day. It sounds awful, and I want this to be taken into context because the guy clearly was mentally ill. And anyway, that aside, there was this footage of a guy on the train who takes his trousers down, a black guy on an underground train. He drops his trousers, and he's mentally ill. All right, I get that. There's something not right with him. But a passenger guy says to him, mate, there's kids here, you can't do that. You can't go taking down your trousers. And he kicks off, he starts telling him to F off and all that. And then another guy stands up and says, you know what, I'm not putting up with it either. So they decide to deal with it. And it results in the guy fighting back, but it results in him getting a good kicking, right? And then taken off the train. But that's what should have happened. That is the right thing that should have happened. You know, you can't walk away and ignore it. You have a duty to protect the vulnerable. And if it means someone gets a bit of a shoe pie, then that's what happens, right? We'll deal with that. Don't go over on a ball, you know, but deal with it. And if it means it has to be dealt with fastly, aggressively, then so be it. You know, you can lick your wounds later. But for the time being, that's what we should be doing. And when you see police running away from public disorder, that's a shameful day.
Scary, mate. I know, it's fuck.
Yeah, it's a sad, sad day.
Sad, mate.
Yeah. And we saw that with the Black Lives Matter protests. We saw them running away. It was that's when we knew that we'd lost it. And that's when we knew they lost it. And they shouldn't be dancing at pride festivals either. They shouldn't be doing it. You know, it's not.
You're a very knowledgeable man, mate, and I just love listening to you, John. I'm so grateful that you've dedicated your time, mate. It's nice, mate, to hear another professional speak in this manner. You know, it makes you feel not alone. Well,
yeah, you know, I I get contacted by all sorts of people. I even get contacted by PDF files that just want to talk to me, right? And they do, and
was that anonymously?
yeah, one, yeah, they do. You get their name, and I'll have a chat on the phone, and it does happen. And you know, one he said, you put my story out there?" And he was convicted of what he did to his daughter. But he then goes on to tell me his story. And now I'm not, you know, saying that I've got total compassion for the guy and forget his daughter. You know, I initially was like, well, tell me what happened to your daughter, and is she away from harm? It was historic and all that. And he went, yeah, and I got convicted and I never saw her again. And that's that. And I'm deeply sorry, blah, blah, blah. But he then tells me what happened to him as a child. It was without a doubt the worst story I've ever heard. Was it true? Well, I had no reason to disbelieve it. Did it tie in with the profiling of an offender? Yes, it did. It did. that I'm not putting him in a category of someone like Sidney Cook, who is a prolific offender, who chooses to link in with other PDF files and have a ring and go out there and all that, you know. But I did listen to him, and it was the worst story I'd ever heard. And it just goes to show the danger that it does, because again, sins of our fathers, what was done to him, he went on to do. We need to break the cycle. I had an active Satanist rang me up, and he went, I just want to say thank you for what you do. I said, well, you know, I'm quite an outspoken Christian. He went, yeah, I do. He said, I bet it. He said, but listen, John, what you understand is what these people did to me was wrong. And when I went to Satanism, I could do spells and I cursed these PDF files. This is what I do. And I used the demonic spells and all that to cut. That's what I see. And I see that I'm doing good. And he said, you get trolled a lot. And I went, yeah, I do. And he went, well, I've been doing satanic prayers against your trolls, and I've been cursing them. And I saw the value in what he was doing. And I said, well, you know, I'd rather if you did it in the name of Jesus, like, you know, but I saw why. And
You get
he
that.
said, but he was a victim himself. And he said, I'll follow you and I'm going to continue to follow it. And I had to have respect for him for what, you know, for who he was and what he stood for. Was he a bad man? No, he wasn't. You know, was his intentions good? Yes, they were. But how he went about it conflicted with what I was saying. So, you know, it's not a black and white thing with me. You know, I will do, and I have done, sit down and break bread with anyone. It's not for me to judge. It really isn't. There are those, Jesus called them whitewashed tombs, you know, the pristine white on the outside with the stench of death on the inside. There's those in government that have never done, they probably never even got a parking ticket, but they're whitewashed tombs. Do they do any good? No, they do nothing. They do absolutely nothing. In fact, that Satanist who I spoke about a minute ago probably does more good than they do. You know, so that's how you got to look at it. You know, it's by their fruit show you know them, not by their words. You know, their words are empty and they're hollow, right? It's the actions that matter. But I will say to people, do everything within the parameters of the law. A good friend of mine, he went outside of the law. He nearly took me with him, and it was in North Wales, and it was an abduction of a child. He had genuine belief the child was being abused, and he took the law into his own hands. He's now serving 17 years in prison, 17 first offence. And I could have been alongside him. And there were 6 others that went away, and they all got, I think it was about 100 years dished out on that case. So, you know, sometimes, you know, the means don't justify the ends. So you've got to be careful, you know. And that do it. I mean, you've got these hunter groups that go out and do stuff, and you know they use the law. They used, you know, the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, the only person powers. You know, they use it the right way. That's okay. I don't like it when they torment the people that they arrest. That's wrong. You shouldn't do that. You know, you got to be professional. You'll lose cases.
Innocent until proven guilty. You know.
Yeah. And I watched one, and they went and got a 17-year-old lad, and he'd been chatting up a 14-year-old girl. Well, yes, mate. And you know, and I said to I contacted them, I said, listen, it wasn't against the law a few years ago for a 24-year-old to have sex with a 14-year-old. There was an allowance in the law, and it's changed it now. I said, but that does not make that lad a PDF file for doing that, and the law will allow for that, right? And this kid was clearly distressed. I'm thinking, what if he commits suicide? You know, it didn't happen. What they took was a preventive measure, but it was awful what they were doing. You know, they were just they're picking low hanging fruit at times. You know, and I've seen them other times when they've gone round, and these people clearly are very, very damaged, vulnerable people. Really, really damaged, and the chance of them ever, you know, carrying through with what they suggested is pretty much non-existent. You know, and again, I'm thinking, now these people legally, they'll be protected by the law because they're very, very vulnerable, very, very damaged. You know, So you've got that side of it, which I don't agree with. But on the other side, there are some very, very dangerous people that what they're doing by online grooming is a tip of the iceberg, which is in their mens rea, in their intent. And, and they probably, in intervening with these people, they probably prevented some very, very serious offending against children. And when that is done, I'm totally on board with them. I think they do a tremendous job. And it's a shame that it's civilians that have to do it, not the police. So I'm all for that. I'm totally all for that. But, that's why when you work in child protection, that you have to be vetted. And like I said earlier, one of the provisos is that you're not a survivor yourself, because you could have a very over-exaggerated sense of justice, and they call it the saint to the sinner, and they call it the hero complex. There's these psychological things for it, where like Superman, you're coming to save that child, but you can get overzealous with what you're doing, and there won't be a balance, that reasonable approach that you should be having in these cases, So that's why when with the government, when you deal with these cases, you can't be a survivor of it, because of that unbalanced nature that it might invoke when you're dealing with a case. So, but there'll be no regulation like that when it comes to these hunter groups. You'll see a lot of them are survivors themselves, and they'll openly say that, and they'll start losing it. It was done to me, and you can see their personal emotions coming out when they're dealing with it, and that's not healthy either.
No,
But
it should be impartial, isn't it?
yeah. So I'm not, I'm not criticising. I'm not attacking survivors or anything like that. But what happens with the survivor community? You get a lot of idolatry. So when I first started speaking out, I got contacted by a lot of people, and they were like, we love you," but they don't know me, and they shouldn't really be loving me. They might like what I do, but it started becoming idolatry. They thought that I was something I wasn't. I was this man that was going to stop the police ever, being dysfunctional when it comes to child abuse cases. But when they realised that I couldn't do it, I was just one human being. They went from saint to a sinner in a heartbeat. So the moment they realised I was just human, and again, it's a survivor trait. Um, I went from these messages: "You're brilliant, you're great, you're that." To the next thing, I hate you. You're a fraud. You're a liar. You work for the government. You're an MI6 shill and all. I don't even know what that means, but I got called all of that because that's what it invoked. So again, it's called the saint to the sinner, and it is that unreasonable. Again, like I said, that emotional brokenness comes out in them. And it's you have to recognize that, so it's a minefield when you go out there. And a lot of survivor groups, they don't tend to last because they infight. So what you'll get is they'll compete with each other. Someone will say, well, I was in a kids home and I was RAPED, you wasn't, you was just here, or my brother was killed, you didn't lose a brother. So they start competing like a game of top trumps, and the infighting occurs. And again, the broken child comes out. Okay, mate, the broken child comes out, and it gets unreasonable very quickly, So that's how it is. So it's a minefield. It's a balancing act with all of it, But the thing is now, because of not just myself, but there's others that have worked for the government, that have been in these positions of power and all that, and have spoken out as whistleblowers. That, there's a few of us that no longer can the police, the government, fob the public off like they used to. They can't do it anymore because we broke that mold, and we've turned around and said, yeah, no, there is a conspiracy of silence, and they do cover things up, and there is corruption, and it's like
Everywhere.
I mentioned St. Paul. He said, it's not flesh and blood that we fight, it's wickedness in high places, principalities. And this is what we're fighting. We're fighting wickedness in high office, perversion in high office. And this is what we're seeing. By their fruit shall we know them, and we know them by the fact that they allow this predation of our children. And they allow the police not to police properly. They're allowing it, and they are. There is no other explanation. This isn't stupidity. This isn't naivety. This is deliberate evil that's going on.
You couldn't be this crap. You know, this is definitely deliberate.
No, that's right. That's right. You know, when I was threatened with the loss of my home, my job, and my children if I continued, you know, exposing what I was doing in the police. You know, they tried to take my children away. They tried to put me in prison. I got arrested 9 times. You know, the things that they did to me. And because of what I knew. And I was told quite clearly, this can never get out. If this gets out, you will lose your home, your job, and your children. So it wasn't, we won't deal with this because we're incompetent and we don't know what we're doing. I was told this will not be allowed to get out because it will ruin us. You know,
you'll be thrown to the wolves.
He's thrown to the wolves. You will be thrown to the wolves. You know, and that's it. And I had a choice. What do I do? And it was only really with the death of one of these victims, I thought, no, I've got to speak out. I've got to speak out. And it was a painful decision to make because I knew from that moment on I was in a world of trouble. But you know, I would have gone under if I was a dirty man. If I was a dirty man. If I was a man,
like many do, unfortunately.
If I'd been compromised in the past, financially, sexually, whatever, I you know, and you know, those bribes have been put my way. They had. But firstly, I'm not a pervert, you know, like that. I worked with many blokes that were, you know, shocking, really. I just wasn't. I'm not of that ilk. I'm not like that. I'm not a promiscuous man. I'm not a lech. I'm just not. And I'm not saying it to big myself up. That's just not how I was born and built. And corrupt wise, well, there's nothing they had I wanted. So I'm quite odd in as much as I don't follow music. I've never been to a concert in my life.
Oh, wow.
I don't follow football. I don't see what it's about, you know. I don't idolize people. There's no one. Music, film stars, I don't idolize any of them. But there's certain people. There's a guy called Gennady Mokanenko. Right, Gennady Mokanenko. I idolize him. I think this guy's flipping brilliant. And he's a priest in the Ukraine, in Kiev, which we hear a lot about. Now what Gennady is, he's a former soldier in the Russian army, a former boxer, right, a fireman, and then he become a priest. And what he does is he, for his exercise, he does his weight training, his circuit training, but he also does swimming in the freezing cold water. You know, he gets down in the Black Sea and he has a swim, and he's a proper hard. And when you see him, he just looks like a hard Russian geezer, you know. And with the collapse of communism and everything else in Russia, they sort of basically abandoned everyone. And the Ukrainians just aren't really nice people. They got a horrific human rights sort of thing, and they don't really give much of a monkeys for neglected children either. So the kids' homes didn't get funding, and the Ukrainian government didn't bother picking up where the Russians left off, so they just abandoned them. You know, that's why I'm not a big fan of Ukraine. So these kids ended up living on the street, but to get warm, they lived in the sewers. And Ukraine is in the middle of the trade route for the heroin, so it comes out from, you know, that part of Turkey, Iraq, Afghanistan, all that, and it makes its way through Ukraine. There's a huge trade in heroin in Eastern Europe. It's, you know, because there's a lot of suicide. You know, in Eastern Europe, Lithuania has 9 times the suicide figures of men than we do in this country. 9 times. And you see a lot of it in them parts of the world. It's a very macho culture, and there's a lot of expectations on men, and there's not a lot of work and everything else. So there's a big market for heroin. So it's there's a lot of heroin about. And these kids were getting on heroin, and to make it, of course, they were going into the sex game. And this guy was so appalled at it, he said, "Well, I'm not having it." So he said, right, I'm going to do something about it. So he gets himself a minibus and he goes into the sewers and he just grabs these kids and throws them in the minibus, takes them back and he cleans them up. And he gets them boxing, he gets them cycling. He's a dad to them, gives them a hot dinner. And he then says, right, who's selling you drugs? And they tell him. And he says, right, come, we're going to find them. He goes and finds the drug dealers and he smashes them in the face. And they film him doing it. He goes up and just smashes them. And then he puts them in his minibus, takes them to the police station and went, this guy's been selling drugs. And if there's a shop selling it, he goes and he does them as well. But if he finds a PDF file that's been using these services of these kids, he goes and gives them a proper good kicking. And he does the same. His citizens arrest them and takes them into the police station battered. And I'm watching this guy, I'm thinking, he's amazing. He's better than, you tell me, any celebrity. Them celebrities are all dirty perverts anyway. The footballers are all weirdos. This is what we should be idolising. This is a man doing God's work. And he borrowed money off the Russian mafia because he had too many kids in his house. He was like, I don't know what to do. I need to build an extension. So he borrowed money and he couldn't pay it back. So the Russian mafia went to shoot him. And when they went round his house, he couldn't pay the money. The mafia boss looked at what he was doing and said, well, look, I was one of them kids. I was in a kid's home. That's why I ended up in crime, because I got abused. Same story, same pattern. I went, I'll tell you what, we're going to build you an orphanage. And the Russian mafia built him an orphanage.
What?
Not the Ukrainian mafia, the Russian mafia built him an orphanage. And this guy now runs an orphanage, something like 200 kids. There's a documentary called Almost Holy. And I look at and I'm thinking, this is what a politician should be. And he goes on the street and he openly speaks out. And, one kid was saying, I run away because my dad's beating my mum. And he beats me. And he went round there and he gave the dad a right hander and said, you're never going to touch your wife again. And that's that. And the dad was, well, we'll try and help you. And but he gets them in the water, cold water swimming. Why don't we see that in this country? Why don't we see men like that? Why don't we do it? Why? Why not? What is wrong? I set up a campaign called PSAD. It's an acronym for Pence Swimming Against Depression. And the slogan was PSAD, not BSAD. And I got hold of a GoPro camera and someone showed me you can put them underwater. I was thinking, oh, that's clever. And so I bought this little thing that you put the GoPro on your head. And I said, right, I am now going to swim in open water in the United Kingdom every single week of the year. And I'm going to document it and I'm going to show myself. And I haven't done it for a year. And that's probably why I put on weight, but I end up losing about 2 stone in weight. But I've never felt so good in my life. And no matter whether it's nighttime, whether it's raining, whether it's a hurricane force wind at sea, I said, I'm going to swim. Wherever I am, I'm going to swim. And I did. And I swam for a year and I documented it. And at the same time, I put out little videos and they ended up going viral. And I was putting facts about suicide, in there. But also facts about what cold water therapy does. And it's unparalleled in what it does. It's like someone flicks a switch. You go from feeling lethargic, lazy, fat, useless, to feeling alive in a heartbeat. And all
I can tell you it's one of the best things I do. I suffer with PTSD from photo therapy, and it's the best thing I do for a poor sleeping habit. When I cold water therapy, I'm able to drop off.
Do you know the Gurkha regiment got in touch with me and said, can you come up? So they've got a barracks somewhere in, can't remember where it was now, Nottingham or somewhere like that. They've got a lake. They've been gifted a lake. It's at the back of it, and they've started doing it. And then a guy from the Royal Marines said, look, come along. We've got a group called Ice Pigs. They call them Ice Pigs. And they do the same. They just push them into this freezing cold lake, in Royal Marines fashion and say, right, swim. And it's had an amazing effect. Of course, there's a lot more to it. It's not just the swimming, there's a lot more goes on with the therapy, but it's a start. But, all you'll ever have is the old mother and you saying, "Oh, it's really cold, shouldn't get in there, you know, shouldn't." But they need someone like me, the dad in them, saying, "Stick that, get
in
down,
there.
get in your pants, and get in there."
Yeah.
And that's that. And I've got a rule: once I turn up, I must go in, and that's my rule. And I turned up once at a lake, and it was night because it got dark, and I had a coat on, I had one of those thin chalet hats on. I was absolutely freezing. I was shaking. I had gloves on. And I'm thinking, in a minute, I'm stripping down to my pants and I'm swimming. And I'm thinking, how am I going to do it? And I did it. And I did it. But as I was putting my clothing back on, I stayed in the water too long because I got so high from it. And I thought I'd do a video. So I did a video and I started drifting into this bizarre world. And I realised I can't move. And I'd gone into hypothermia very quickly, you know. And I was live streaming, but I did manage to compose myself. I got a grip and just got my clothing on, and I managed to get to my car and get the heating on. But it was, you shouldn't really, you know, I was on my own. It was at night. It was worst case scenario, but my argument was that it made me feel brilliant, and I did. I felt absolutely brilliant. But
don't overdo it, innit?
Yeah, you got to be careful. You know, there is always that little risk, but don't do it if you can't swim. But you know, the argument is it's old-fashioned therapy. It don't cost anything. But we have got young men being brought up now in the absence of fathers. And all you're going to get is the mother saying, "Oh, no, stay in bed. He's got a cold," you know. And it's not healthy for men. It's not. There was a really interesting thing I was watching, and it was about Scotland, Glasgow. And Glasgow, you know, is synonymous with being tough, hard place. It's got it did have the highest murder rate in the Western world, you know. And anyway, that aside, the Glaswegian accent was a very rough, raw, guttural accent, right? You know, and all of a sudden, it became this squeaky thing amongst their youth, and they're disaffected, disenfranchised, disconnected, you know, dysfunctional youth. They call them NEDs, right? It's an acronym called non-educated delinquents. And there's a brilliant film. There's a brilliant film called Ned's, a really good film. I think it's a Shane Meadows film. It's brilliant. And these Neds, we call them scroats or whatever, you know. But these Neds, they're just scroats, really, you know, from these big tower block estates in Glasgow, causing chaos. But they realised that they had a squealy voice. They went from that hard Glaswegian voice to this, and they've all got it. You Google it, Neds, right? And they've got this awful squealy Glaswegian accent. And you've got these social scientists thinking, where's that come from? And when they looked into it, they realised that a lot of them were brought up without dads. They were brought up in these enclosed environments in these big tower blocks on these housing estates with mothers. A lot of them were neurotic, suffering from mental health problems. So all they ever heard was a squealing woman, and they end up mimicking. And there's a village in Gloucestershire, a town, and its sole source of employment is a chicken factory, and they're just killing and gutting chickens. It's just, you know, and they've got battery chickens, everything, and it's mainly local women working there. And the women started again developing a different accent, and they found out it's because all they're doing is being around chickens all day. Beep, 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 beep. And the women end up mimicking like the chickens almost with the way they were talking. It's like, beep, 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 beep. So you're conditioning to your environment. But this is what we're getting now. We are getting men that have become demasculated, you know, and we gotta get a grip. We gotta
bring it back.
We gotta stop men leaving. We gotta stop this baby father culture, which is it had its inception within the, you know, the Black Afro-Caribbean community, you know, where it was almost looked at the more kids that you father, the better you is. I mean, there's that a famous interview with that black rapper reggae star called Ninja Man, and he's got something like 23 children.
Oh, yeah, a real man.
Real man, yeah, that real man. Yeah. I mean, what a bell end, you know, a real man. You know what I mean? We got to get away from that. That ain't a real man. But what I'd like to say to that, if you want to be a real man, a lion protects his pride, right? A lioness never abandons her cubs, right? If you want to be a real man and be that lion, right, protect it, because a child is at risk 30 times that of the norm in the presence of a stepfather, right? Let that sink in. Not once, not twice, not 3 times at risk of being abused. 30 times. 80% of all abuse is in the home. So if you've got that broken home, and then you've got the presence of a step parent, I'm not saying they're all bad, because there's not. There's some good step parents, and I was one. But however, statistically, there's a good chance. So if you're one of them men, the real man that likes to baby father everywhere, they call it baby daddy. It's an appalling terminology, because it's immature and it lacks responsibility. You know, what does it even mean? It's just flippant. It's got a disconnect, and they band it around like it's funny. Oh, that's one of my baby daddies. It's appalling. It's shameful as well. But if you're one of them man that does do the baby father thing, all you're doing is allowing your child to be abused by men. Does that make you a man? No, it doesn't. It makes you a very, very weak man at all. And again, there'll be people saying, John, you're being unfair. I don't care. I don't care if I'm being unfair to a grown man. Take a bollocking.
Here, mate.
And pull it right, you know, because it's those poor little kids who are frightened, who need you at home. They need you fighting their corner.
That's what these Satanisms, they try to do. They try everything they can to try and weaken families, don't they?
100%.
Because
Exactly.
when you're a family, mate, you are, you're the fucking alpha. You got your team. But when you're not, like you said, I seen one thing as well, that pedos, I'm not going to say the full word, but they, I like what you've done with the PDFs. That's good, mate.
Yeah.
But they're a lot more likely, I've never heard that before, they're a lot more likely to offend when there's no dad. That's one of the first things that they check.
Well, they found that in the care homes. The children that were in care homes that didn't have an angry dad or a big brother got singled out. You know, because if member of the care home staff is going to abuse a kid and he's just going to tell his dad when he comes to visit, there's going to be a problem. So they would pick on those that didn't have anyone. They didn't have no one to turn to, and this is what they do. And they're patient as well. They will, and they will predate. They will, especially when you get, online dating and things like that. They know what to do. They sit there, wait, and they watch, and they pick on them. It's I mean, one of the most appalling ones is when you look at the life of that guy Mick Philpott, who's this one who set fire to his own house in order to sort of self-proclaim as a hero in saving his kids, but he didn't realise the fire would take hold, and his kids all died. But he had something like 13 children, and he was hanging around with girls, like 14, 15-year-old girls. And, he's there with a big macho moustache and, and all that. But, there used to be a saying about that, but I'll save that for another day. I don't want to get you kicked off, but it's, it's all that macho thing. You've got to think behind it. Why? What's going on that you have to over-masculate yourself like that? And he was just predating on young girls. And we see it all the time. And I think this is the education that should be in schools. This is the education that police recruits should be getting. And
it's going to come back, mate. It's going to come back. I say come back. It's what we are going to. When they say Christ is going to return, I don't know whether you're familiar with the Christos oil that goes to the Umon, Dula Blangata, and down the 32 vertebrae. Yeah. I believe that everybody now is coming to this awakening process, and all this information that you've been saying, I didn't realize for how long, but it's all coming out now. And I believe that's what they mean when they say, Christ is coming back. It's not Christ coming back. It's all of us realizing how powerful we are,
Well, I mean, I get where you're coming from, but when you look at a revival in Christianity and things like that, the ones I'm seeing it through, you get that massive one within the gypsy community, huge in there, and within the criminal classes, right? People, because they've experienced evil. Unfortunately, our young people are becoming incredibly atheistic, right? And there's a danger in that because they don't believe evil exists. And it's all this, if I don't hurt anyone, no one can hurt me, that karmic belief system. And it's very, very dangerous because, you know, and also now that we've got a socialist government, there won't be impetus in having strong Christian values because the state will be your mum, your dad, in your place of worship. And this guy we've got at the moment, two-tier Keir, he's a Marxist. And that is keeping us in a state of perpetual revolution and destroying everything. And people are saying, well, he's eradicating free speech. Well, if you vote in a Marxist leader, what do you expect he's going to do? Do you know what I mean? He's not doing anything that he's not saying he hasn't done. He's a Marxist. He's a self-proclaimed Marxist. This is what happens with Marxism. They eradicate free speech. And also, you know, when we look at abuse that went on historically, there was a greater propensity and a greater concentration of abuse that went on within left-wing constituency. So Labour will always have a higher peak in reported cases of child abuse than the right wing will, because it's what happens when you get that liberalisation. It's what happens with the equality laws and things like that. It allows for this predation to carry on. And then you've got a thing called sentencing guidelines. Now, the right wing has always been tough on crime. So Home Secretaries that are right wing have always been hated within the prison population, because the prisoners are going to get a hard time under a right wing government, whereas they're not under a left wing government. But crime is not going to get dealt with as stringently under a left wing government as it would a right wing government. You see, and that's what it is. So when you see what people are getting banged up for, well, that's what will happen. So if you go against the state, you're going to get more time than if you abuse a child, because that's what happens under left wing politics. And that is when the Attorney General will be left wing appointed. But when we get a right wing government, we'll get an appointed Attorney General from a right wing point of view who will do more to protect children, because that's the nature of the beast. So we're not being hoodwinked at all. They're doing what they told us they'll do. And what do you expect? You know, what do you expect a Marxist leader to do? He is going to curtail your freedom of speech. And that's what's going to happen. And he ain't going to change, because that's what he is. He ain't going to change. And it is going to get worse and worse and worse until maybe there's a vote of no confidence and he goes. At what point are the British people going to allow this? But I think that I've never voted, right? I think I voted when I was 18, and then I got a bit, didn't really bother with it after that. And then the more I got in the police, the more I got disillusioned with the whole thing anyway. But this next election, I will be voting. And I think you're going to find a lot of the, what do they call us? Apathetic Indigenous people like myself are actually going to make an effort and vote. And I won't be voting for the Tories, and I won't be voting for Labour either. I'll be voting independent. I won't be voting for Nigel Farage because I don't trust the guy. And that Enoch Powell warned us about him. He's not to be trusted. Do not trust this man. He refused to endorse his candidature for a political position he went for. You know, whatever people think of Enoch Powell, he was a clever man and a genius. But he warned us early days about Nigel Farage. But it's that, you know, people, when you're drowning at sea, you'll take any lifeline. And, you know, there seemed to be a lifeline. But in the local election, it has gone to show, if the microcosm is the example of the macrocosm, that people are fed up of the two-party state. They're fed up of it. But I will say to everyone, you know, be very, very careful what you do. Do everything within the parameters of the law, especially when it comes to the social media and things like that. Because if you go outside here, you're going to get crushed. And if you're banged up, you are of no use to anyone. What use are you when you're banged up? What use are you when you're deplatformed? You're of no use.
I had a friend arrested yesterday for his Facebook post.
For a Facebook post?
Yes.
What did he put on it?
He shared about illegal fellas in hotels in May.
Yeah, that, you know, it's unbelievable. But again, it's going against what the Marxist government wants. So if they say, right, anyone who criticises this will get banged up, that's what happens. And the file will go through to the CPS, and the Attorney General will be lent on to start persecuting. I worked on many police units. I specialised in child abuse, but I've been on all sorts of things, fraud, public order things, and all detective. But I was on one, and it was to do with it was a secondment. We would get seconded to things, sometimes without our own permission. We just get sent on them. And one was to do with the backlash of the 2011-2012 riots. They needed detectives to start helping investigate because it was students rioted, millions of students and all that. And all of a sudden I saw a side of the government I didn't know existed. Before, especially with child protection, you had no resources, there was no overtime, you was massively overworked, and it was just hard going. And you didn't even have a car sometimes. But when it was to do with anything against the government, we were given a rental car, which we could take home with the petrol cars. So basically, I had a free car for 2 years, doing what I wanted with it. I had as much overtime as my personal life would accommodate. And on the working environment, ordinarily would have to complete a file for an intended prosecution, take it to the Crown Prosecutor, the CPS, make an appointment, which could take 2 months, get an appointment, and then it could be another 2 months before they made a decision. So it was a lengthy, convoluted, pain in the ass process. But when this covert unit was set up at a very covert location, no one even knew we were police, and we were working in this industrial unit, dealing with stuff to do with the government. We were appointed a barrister in our office, and they were on a 24-hour basis, so they worked round the clock with us, and they made decisions then and there within 5 minutes. And once they made a decision to charge someone, the courts would open up, even if it was 4 a.m, and they'd hold a trial in the court at 4 a.m, 24 hours. And what someone could have got a caution for, they were getting 2 years for. So when the Southport thing kicked off, I did a post warning people. I said, if you've broken the law, you're going to get 2 years minimum. Well, of course, they got more than that. They got 3 years, But I warned them. I said, they will do this because I've seen it happen. Is it fair? No, it's not. It's not fair. It's not fair. And that's how it is. If you go against Starmer, you're going to get it. Be prepared to go away.
You know what, though, mate? I recently had a letter. So I paid my mortgage off with a promissory note. I'm not sure whether you're familiar with the law, Den.
Yeah. My mate did it. Yeah.
So we got to court and we submitted the UCC 1308 filings also, but the judge wouldn't allow me to speak of the promissory note. So I am very vocal on my social media, and they've recently sent me a letter saying that the bailiffs won't come to my house because of my social media. Now, as I've told you earlier on, they deleted my social media today, but I'm actually banned from the police stations in South Wales, mate, because I've gone and I've tried to submit, for example, the affidavit to Dr. Francis Boyle. And I know in my heart, mate, that any individual that's in the government that's turning a blind eye to this, you're complicit. Okay. So because I voice my opinion on Facebook and I'm ready to take the law into my own hands, I guess I don't know what's going to happen, but they won't come to my house.
I'll tell you something, because I work with a lot of ex-offenders and that. I was working with one guy, and he went away for 8 years for armed robbery. And I said, well, what'd you do? And he's a character, him and his mate. They used to go in the mosque and steal burqas out the mosque. And they'd dress up as Arab women, and they'd wait for a cash in transit delivery. And then when the fella turned up, they'd smash his face in and nick the money do a runner, and then they'd get a car, stolen car, and they'd ram the box against the wall and pop it open. And of course, they got die packs in there, and they had a couple of minutes to get out as much cash as they could before it was all ruined. You know, so about a third of the money would get ruined. So he said they did this, and then they got chased by police, and they did a runner in burkas. Anyway, I said, how much do you get? He went, 16 grand. And he said, we shared it between us, right? So he ends up with, I think there's 3 of them. They end up sharing 16 grand between 3 people. So whatever that ends up, about 5 and a bit grand each. And I said, well, what'd you do? He said, well, within like a couple of weeks, he'd done it all on cocaine, partying and everything else. And of course, he got caught because he was going to get caught. And he got 8 years, and he served quite a lot of time. With that 8 years, he got stabbed in prison and all sorts. Anyway, and I said, right, was it worth it? He went, well, of course it won't. I said, listen, I'll tell you something. I said, I was in a lot of money trouble, and I went to a financial advisor who was an ex-policeman. He said, put him for a home improvement loan because it's unsecured. And I went, all right. So I did. So I needed home improvement work getting done anyway, and they gave me this loan. And it was, I don't know how much it was. It was 27,000 or something like that I got. And I couldn't pay it. I just couldn't pay it. And so I said to this guy, look, I got this loan and I've spent it, because I was a single parent with a mortgage and all that. And he went, well, it's unsecured. It's up to you what you want to do. He said, but I suggest you don't bother paying it. I went, well, I can't do it. And he went, there's not much I can do about it. I went, seriously? He went, no. So I never paid it. And of course, I then get all the letters, everything else. And so I rang this guy up again. I said, look, I'm in a load of trouble. He says, is it affecting your mental health? I went, yeah. Well, he said, go and see your doctor. Tell your doctor. So I told my doctor, look, I'm in a lot of money trouble and it's affecting my mental health. And he said, would you want me to write to the bank for you? And I went, oh, would you? He went, yeah, that's right. And he did it. I got a colleague at work to do it. And then the next thing, the bank wrote back to me and they said, well, unfortunately, this is how it's going to go, and you owe us all this interest. So it went up and up and up. And so I rang this fella up again. I said, look, this is ridiculous. I should have never got this. He went, well, if you're fed up, we can go to the financial ombudsman. So I went to the financial ombudsman and I reported the bank for harassment. And I won. So the bank was told not to harass me. They awarded me £5,000 plus the interest and all that. And they had to freeze the interest. And they was only allowed to then take for the minimum amount. And I still couldn't pay it. So then the next thing, the bank went from 27,000 plus I've now been given 5 grand, which is about 30 or 32 grand of that. They then said, well, will you pay 19,000? I went, well, I can't pay that. And then a year later, they offered me 14,000. Then a year later, it went down to 7. In the end, they wrote it off, right? They wrote it off. And I thought I'd end up trouble, losing my house. And go, no, it's unsecured. They wrote the thing off. So I said to this lad, I said, you've robbed a bank and you've done this and done that. And I said, you end up getting that. I said, look what I've done. I've taken the bank for 30 grand and nothing. Because one way is lawful and one way is illegal. I'm not saying what I did was right because maybe morally it was wrong. I don't know. But I got it with all good intention and everything else. But the point of the matter is they wrote it off because they can write it off because it don't mean nothing to them.
You got to be within the boundaries of law, mate. But then you're happy days, aren't you?
Yeah. But if had that been my mortgage, they wouldn't have written it off because that's secured, And so there's all these little things. It's a bit like the parking tickets. Get one on a public road, they'll bang you up. They'll send the bailiffs around and you could go to prison. I've seen people go to prison for not paying parking fines. But get one in these silly car parks, well, they can get stuffed, can't they, And that's sort of how it is. But they put the fear of God into people.
They do.
But once you know what is allowed, what is lawful, what is legal, it's empowerment, and it is empowerment. But they've been ripping the arse out of us. I mean, you're seeing it now with these all these little companies now making money out of. Did you get car finance? You shouldn't have paid. Same as getting a an overdraft and they charge you interest on the overdraft and things like that, which they were doing for years, just blatantly nicking money off people, knowing that they shouldn't be doing it. They knew damn well they shouldn't do it. And now, you know, of course, who's going to apply for it? Probably 1%, 10% of those that they've ripped off. They made a killing out of it. Credit card companies charging 80, 90% interest. You know, when you look at these credit cards, they show you one of them was 89% interest. I mean, it's unbelievable. Shocking. You know, yet they've been doing it for year in, year out, year in, year out, and just lying their way through it because it's lawful what they're doing.
And because your dad got ripped off and he's taught, again, it's ancestral trauma, mate. Because it happened for them, we think it's all right.
Well, it's acquiescence to the system. We put our faith in the system. You know, and years ago, the doctors would look after us, but now, you know, they don't look after us. And of course, the lockdown was a classic example. People just, when I was going through my fight with the police, I had to go sick. I went sick, and of course, I had to then go and get sick now, and that was all through the PTSD sort of level. And my doctor, GP, he's a really lovely guy, and he went, "No, I'm going to sign you off indefinitely. You never have to go back to them again." He said, "But I'm telling you now, they're not going to give up too easy." He said, "When you take on the government, and especially with what you're doing, you're exposing things, they're really going to come for you, John." He said, I really wish you all the best. And he said, my colleague, he had a partnership. They run a surgery together, another doctor. He said he knew that the medicine we were giving to our patients was killing them. So he spoke out about it, right? And he said within a week he was arrested for theft. They accused him of stealing. He said, he got sacked, he got depressed, and he killed himself. He took his own life. And again, the psychiatrist that they referred me to, she said the same. She said, I get a lot of police officers, mainly from child abuse, that have had breakdowns coming here, and they are bullied to the point of almost suicide, and some do kill themselves. And they're the worst enemy. They are the worst enemy. But my doctor turned around and said, you know, if you win, John, you can hold your head up with total integrity. You know, he said, but remember me, I will continue prescribing medicine that I know kills people, because if I don't get funded. He said, so I don't get any extra money for dealing with you because it's mental health. He said, all I get paid for is diabetes and cancer. So the more people in society with diabetes and cancer that come to me and I then medicate them with what I'm told to medicate them, I get bonuses, and I can then get the garden grass cut in the surgery. I can get cleaners in the morning. Otherwise, we've got to do it ourselves. I can get another receptionist. But I know that medicine is killing them. He said, and I do know it's killing them. He said, and I have to go home and put my head on my pillow knowing that I'm a total sellout and I'm killing people. He said, that's the honest truth, John. And it was good of him. It was good of him to be a gentleman and be honest. He said, but what else waits me? I lose everything, and I don't want to end up like my friend. So they end up complying with the system, you know, and that's, are they bad people? No, they're not, because he went into that job wanting to help, you know, really genuinely wanting to help, but he can't, you know, and what do? You either take a stand and they will stamp you into the ground. Trust me, I've been there. Or you just carry on and you just, what they call acquiesce. I mean, I was speaking in a prison, and a prisoner stood up. It was a secure unit, and there were some very dangerous people. Sorry, I lost contact then. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're back, mate.
Yeah. So, and the guy in the prison said, look, if they kick off, I don't think we should go ahead, because there's a lot of people heard you were coming, and a lot of them have come from child abuse, and there's some serious dangerous people here, and we've had some fights today because they're wound up, because they get guest speakers in. And he said, we usually get 10% of our people who turn up, but everyone wants to turn up for your talk. And he said, they're angry, John, and we got some real loonies in here, real head cases. Anyway, I give this talk, and it's total silence. And there's one guy, he's a mixed race guy, and he's sat just staring at me. And he's a big lump, you know, and he's got a big scar down his face. And he's from Manchester, and he went, "You're talking about all these things you've done, and we're meant to think you're a hero. But we hate the old Bill. Every one of us is here because of a copper. Why don't you tell us about the things you haven't done?" And I went, "What do you mean?" He said, "You've been on all these units and all that. You would have seen corruption and all that." And he said, I'm here because I'm here for kidnap and for the R word, you know." And he said, I'm a thief, I'm a burglar. He said, so as a kid, I had a step parent who used to kidnap me, take me to places, and he would arm me, you know. And I grew up full of hate and anger, heroin and crack. And I went out there with anger, and I robbed people, and I kidnapped them, and I hired them. And I think he murdered someone. He's doing 15 years for manslaughter and all that. He said, he's from Salford. He said, I'm one of the hardest men in Salford. I no doubt to disbelieve him. He certainly looked at it, and he spoke the talk, you know. And he says this to me, and he went, you know, "Why don't you start being honest and telling us everything you've done?" I went, "All right, well, let's have an agreement then." And I thought, well, what can I do with my back's against the wall? So I said, so what you in for? And he went, "I told you, I'm in for kidnap and the R word." I said, "So you're telling me that they're the only crimes you've ever committed?" I said, "So you tell me every single crime you've committed, even the ones you haven't been caught for, and I'll tell you the crimes I might or might not have been caught up in. How's that as a deal?" And he looked at me and he burst out laughing. He said, "You know what? You've really got some balls standing here talking here, you know that." And I said to him, "Listen, my friend," I said, if the police and I'm with them and we go and do a warrant and it's a drug dealer's house and there's money there and my colleagues steal it, which they have in the past, I don't care. I'm not interested. You ain't worked hard for it. You've not done an apprenticeship for that job. You've not, do you know what I mean? That cycling to work in the rain and all that, like the other decent people. I don't care. You've been taxed. And if someone gets beaten up by the police because they punched their chest out and mouthed off, and the police are giving them a good pasting, I don't care. I'm not interested. Stay away from them. Don't gob off at them." But when it came to officers trying to deliberately cover up young children, little kiddies being pimped out, I said I was not going to turn my back and walk away. That was a bridge I was not going to cross. And I said, "Not in my name is this happening." And he turned around and he went, "Right, I think everyone should stand up and give this guy a round of applause." And they did. They stood up and gave me a round of applause. But I thought they were going to turn on me. But they didn't. And that was it. I just thought, no, I'd never admit whether I was or wasn't caught up in these things. I'm not going to put, that's an inference that whoever reads my book will have to draw. And if the police decide to look into that, that's up to them what they want to do about that. But to walk away and allow a kid to, no, it was wrong. There was nothing in it was right, and there was no way I could shut my eyes at night like my doctor and go to sleep. I couldn't. And even to this day, I suffer from chronic insomnia, and I cry all the time for those that do. I do. And do you know something? I was in the street and someone recognised me because they do quite a bit, and it was a cross-dresser or a transgender. I'm not too sure, and it was a guy just with boobs dressed as a woman, and you clearly see it was a man. Came up to me and said thank you, and I walked away in tears and I cried for that guy, and I cried for him. I'm thinking, no matter what with the LGBTQ and they're pushing his face, these people that are transgender and everything else, you can see, especially this guy, there was a lot of misery and pain in that guy's life, and I just thought, what have they done to him that makes him be like that and done that to himself? I know there's some make it as a choice, not that, but I just saw pain and misery. And I went and prayed for him. And I prayed for him. Did I have any bad things for him? No, I didn't. I saw him as a victim. And I prayed for the guy. And I get a lot of people contact me from the homosexual community. A lot of gay men contact me, and a lot of them that do contact me were badly abused in the care homes. Badly abused. So I'm not against them. I'm against society pushing this. I am. It should not be pushed.
No, of course not.
No way. But I'm not against the individuals that are in that community. No, I'm not. I pray for them, and I hope they get healing. Because I see a lot of pain. When I was working with street prostitutes, every single one was addicted to heroin and crack cocaine. Every single one, without exception, every single one was addicted to heroin and crack cocaine. Right. And when you got talking to them, most of them were in lesbian relationships. And I said to one of them once, I said, it made me laugh. I said, hang on, your job is all about, the winkle, shall we say, right? That's your job. That's your tool that you work with. And I said to her, how can you be a lesbian? And this woman said to me, I hate men. I hate them because of what they did to me. So, John, I was in a kid's home and men barred me. Men did this to me. Men did this to me. She said, I do this because it pays for my heroin. And it, and that's that. And I got it. And after that, I generally couldn't see the woman as a criminal anymore. I saw her as a victim. And I struggled with going out, and we had to go and nick them, and it was a difficult thing because you just saw them that they were just damaged children, and they were doing the heroin to get. But one of them really got me, and she said, I charge my clients extra for it unprotected, and every single one of these girls had HIV, AIDS. Actually, had AIDS, not HIV. They had AIDS. They had contagious tuberculosis, an antiquated disease that sort of went after the plague, you know what I mean? And they had hepatitis C, which destroys the liver, and they're highly contagious. And two of them are airborne. So even being with the age, there's got to be that contact, But the others is airborne. You can get them from just being near to them. And she said, I charge them extra for unprotected sex. And I went, why would you do that? And I said to him, a lot of them men, they're married, they've got wives and girlfriends and that. And she went, F them, John. If they come to me and they want it without it, I said, but they'll take that AIDS back to their partners. And what if they're pregnant? They pass that on to their child. And she was so full of hate. She said, F them. F them. That's how I got it. That's how they can get it. Full of hatred. And it was like, oh, it was bad. It was really, really bad. Damaged people. And that's all through abuse. And we need to be having this conversation. We need to be having this in the heart of Parliament. But when we come to politicians, there was a really good politician. So they don't like each other, but they both really helped me. So one of them is a really good guy called Andrew Bridgen, who's quite a big noise now on the independent circuit.
He's actually one of my witnesses. He is for my citizen's arrest case.
Well, I like him, and he went out of his way to help me on many occasions, right? Many occasions. And he helped my colleague, Mike Veal, and I think he probably saved Mike Veal's life. So he's a man of integrity. I like him, and I pray for him because he one day someone will put a bullet in his head. Anyway, I pray for him because he's playing a dangerous game, But God bless you, Andrew, and I hope that Jesus got his arm around you because you're a good man. And the other one, was in the same party as Andrew, but they hated each other. Right? Well, there was a man called Michael Penning, Sir Michael, right honourable, what they call him, Privy Council Penning. But he was a minister for policing and crime. And he was in a children's home, and he was an ex-soldier himself. He was an ex-guardsman. He was a Grenadier Guardsman. And he fought in Northern Ireland and whatnot. And he was all right. And he came to my assistance. He said, John, I'm going to stand by you. I think you're a man of integrity. So we decided to start holding these high-powered meetings in the heart of Parliament. So one day he said, right, we're going to take this right in. So you've got Parliament, and what you don't realise, there's an inner Parliament, right, where the government sit, the cabinet sit, right, and it's you've got to be vetted, and you've got to be totally intimately searched to go in there, right? So it's a big deal, this. So we end up in there, right? So we end up in this place. So I go with my pen in, and Theresa May's there, and there's 6 members of the Home Office there, right? The Home Secretary's there, Theresa May, and that. And Mike Penny stands up and says, if I had not stood by Jon Wedger, he would not be alive to this day. And he basically said to him, there was a plot to take you out, the equation. He stood up for me, and he took it as high as we could have taken it, right? Theresa May called me a conspiracy theorist and someone that's just trouble, right? She's mentioned me a few times. And the next day, I was expecting some feedback from Mike, and Theresa May sacked him. She sacked him and said, you must stay away from Jon Wedger if you know what's good for your career. So they're not going to do anything. It comes from some higher, you know, and this is what we're up against. We're up against it. All they give us is words, you know. And look what they did to Andrew Bridgen. They sacked him.
I know.
They ostracized him. And when Mike Penning was a good guy, he was a good guy. But I was in Portcullis House at meeting with Mike Penning. And as we were in this meeting, Andrew Bridgen walks past, right? And he sees me, and he's like, John. I said, oh, Andrew, can I meet you afterwards? Can we go and have a pint? He went, yeah. Because that was a relationship I had with Andrew. And when he went, Mike said to me, are you a mate of his? I went, yeah. He went, he's a CUNT. And he said, it's probably best that you either deal with me or hang around with him. You can't do both, John. And I was like, well, what chance do we have, you know? And he said he's a troublemaker and his political career is not going to last long. And of course it didn't, you know. So everyone was against him, Andrew. Everyone was against him. He really went through it, you know. Bless him.
Getting a lot of support now, though, he is.
Sorry?
I said he's getting a lot of support now.
Yes, the British public like him, and he's a good man. He is a good man, and he whenever I needed him, and I've needed him a few times, he's delivered straight away. He's a good man. He's been a good guy, and he's very, very pro anti-child abuse campaigning.
Yes.
Very, very pro that. So I'm with him all day long. But you know, the battle continues, my friend. It continues, and let's hope they don't deplatform what you're doing here because it's needed.
I'm gonna get back building the other platforms, mate. They'll never stop me. They'll have to. My price is my life. They'll have to kill me to stop me. But I am now a man of God, or my Creator. If I don't want to offend the religions, you know, I believe if you're spiritual, you're on the right path.
Yeah.
So, John, I was only penciled in to do an hour. You've been at least 2.5 hours, mate. But I could honestly listen to you all day. You're so knowledgeable, mate. And it's so refreshing to hear, you know, an ex-corper like yourself, detective, and 20-odd year, not 15-year veteran.
27,
mate. That's an impressive, mate. So on behalf of me and, you know, our whole country, thank you, mate, for everything that you do for the children. I know this life is merely a stepping stone, mate. I looking forward to meeting my Creator. No fear, mate. No fear from these Freemason bullies.
If I can promote my video's out on Vimeo. You go onto Vimeo, you can rent it for a couple of quid. It's called Redemption. Put in Redemption Jon Wedger, you'll get it. It's good. It's people's testimonies of how they've turned their lives around. And I want to do a call out to the survivors and say it's not your shame to carry. You did nothing wrong. It was done to you. You had no choice. And speak out. I know the police are pretty much ineffectual now, but we've got to speak out. We've got the more people speak out, survivors, and tell the world that this happened, the more it becomes a priority. If you remain silent, it just remains hidden under a rock. And now's the time to speak out and have your moment. And hopefully, you know, with justice comes healing. And we need to shame the devil and speak out. And I also want to call out to those that cause this abuse and say, you need to stop it. You need to stop it. Because we're watching you. We're watching you. We know what you're doing. And your days are numbered, one way or another.
Numbers are growing daily.
You know, and it's time to pick a side. And I'm picking God. I'm picking the side of Jesus. I'm not lining myself with the devil, because this is going to become a binary issue. We're going to have to get off the fence, all of us, very, very soon, and pick a side. And let's pick the winning side, you know.
I'm on the side that's not cruel to children, mate.
Yeah,
you know,
amen,
the real side, you know.
Amen to that. I'm with you all the way. But if I can help, I can. I'll always try. I mean, what can I do? But people do get in touch with me, and I do my best. But a lot of it is self-help. You know, that unfortunately that's what it comes down to. But your life is precious, and suicide is not an option. It's not an option.
No.
You know, you're loved. So,
well, I'll tuck on the end. Please look into microdosing psilocybin if you're struggling with mental health, because in a war zone environment, it allows me to, you know, this life just be about bearable. Because I've been through, this will be my second war, and, you know, I understand collateral damage, and I hate seeing my communities, you know, you've mentioned it, mate, for the last 2.5 hours. We're on a decline, mate. Everything is getting worse.
Yes.
All done by design.
Yes. They can stop this in a heartbeat. Look at what's happening in Burkina Faso. You know, that guy has taken a third world country, Ibrahim Traore, and he's turning it around. If he can do it in 5 years, turn his country around from poverty to prosperity, you know, we certainly can. And we've got, you know, the remnants of an empire to rely on. So, and they haven't. So, but let's hope there is a change. So we'll wait and see. We'll wait and see. But,
John, thank you so much for joining, buddy. I'll speak to you soon, and good night, God bless everyone.
Been an absolute pleasure. I'm going for a cup
troops.
of tea now. Thank you so much.
Yes, me too, and a big fat jabber.
Cheers.
Ta-ra, troops.
Cheers,